Chapter 11. Demonic Monk 1. It had been trapped inside a body for a long time. The owner of that body possessed a stronger will and determination than it had anticipated. When it tried to quickly take over the body, the owner blocked the energy flow and cut off his own consciousness. It's no use resisting. Seizing the consciousness was only a matter of time. No matter how strong-willed, he was bound to succumb eventually. Once the weakened body and consciousness were captured, this body could be taken over. It won't be long now. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, an unexpected variable appeared. Just a little longer and it could have broken through the blocked consciousness, but an obstacle arose. Who are you? Ordinary humans cannot perceive their existence, but this being knew how to control it with strange techniques. Are you trying to drive me out? Thus, the being began a battle of wills. It was a matter of driving out or taking over. Then the being was deceived by the one wielding this bizarre technique and ended up inside a wooden doll. How dare you trick me? The resentful being grew even more furious. It felt this anger would only subside after taking over that body again and wringing the neck of the one who tried to expel it. But in the middle, it was interrupted. So the being targeted not the body it had been trying to possess, but the one who interfered. A good body indeed. A young body. Unlike the body it had originally tried to take over, it wasn't overflowing with vitality, but rather it was inclined towards yin energy, making it even easier to run rampant. If it was this body, it was worth possessing. Since it was younger than the previous body, the sense of self and would also be weaker. I'll take over quickly. It just needed to erase the bastard's consciousness. By stimulating the consciousness and trapping it, the sense of self would eventually weaken. However, the being couldn't hide its astonishment. What the hell was the owner of this body? Primal desires that felt like they would pierce through the lungs. It was the desire to kill. Is this guy really a living being? Death, darkness, anger, murderous intent. All of these mixed together were full of yin energy. For the being, this desire filled with death and killing intent was an irresistible instinct. It's the best. The being felt ecstasy at this desire, but soon it was also gripped by a sense of disappointment. If left alone, it would have bloomed into the most magnificent desire, but something was suppressing it, preventing it from fully blossoming. I'll eliminate that factor suppressing your desire. If the desire hadn't fully bloomed yet, it was better to completely unleash it. After all, the ultimate body needed a perfect mind. But then, an unbelievable thing happened. What are you? The bastard recognized it. It tried to trap his consciousness in the current reality, but failed. This can't be. How did he recognize it? It was impossible for a living being to directly perceive or contact it. I asked what you are. Then there was no choice. Even if the method was a bit rough, it had to forcefully proceed with the possession. It chose to forcefully possess. The possession of the body had already begun, and if it devoured the will and consciousness, he would have no choice but to surrender the body. SSS. For the first time it felt perplexed. The possession was occurring in reverse. The energy that had penetrated the body was instead being absorbed by the bastard. It happened at an unimaginable speed. Stop. What are you babbling about? Stop it. You're noisy? No, I said you're noisy, didn't I? I'll give up. I'll leave, so stop it. At this rate, it might be completely devoured. It tried to escape somehow, but now the bastard was grasping it. Phew! Diviner Myo-Sin let out an exhausted sigh, then picked up the sword that had fallen on the floor. He thought it would be light, but the weight of the sword was quite heavy. Gripping the sword with both hands, Diviner Myo-Sin looked at the Manor Master with a tense expression. Can I do it? Even if he had exorcised demons and such before, he had never killed a living human. So when he actually tried to do it, he felt nervous, but he had to do it. I have to kill him. Only then could he complete the madam's request and pin everything on this guy. He would say that while possessed by the demon in the Manor Master, he went berserk and killed the Manor Master. If that happened, with the madam's help, he could naturally dispose of this guy. Let's do it. He had to hurry. If this guy's guard outside came in, things would go wrong. Diviner Myo-Sin tried to take a step towards the Manor Master. Right at that moment, flinch. Diviner Myo-Sin, who was about to take a step, flinched. Gripped by a spine-chilling coldness that made his skin crawl, Myosin slowly turned his head with a stiff expression. Myosin couldn't hide his bewilderment for a moment. He doubted his own eyes. A hazy figure larger than an average adult by 2 heads was glaring at him, emitting a ghastly gaze. This is a giant monk in bloody robes with a skull rosary around his neck. The monk's face, devoid of any vitality, was lifeless. It was a demon. Myosin could tell this being was undoubtedly a demon. Those like him, diviners, called them demons or vengeful spirits, but people also referred to them as ghosts. Trickle? Cold sweat ran down Myosin's forehead, had his spiritual sight heightened. This was the first time he saw a demon with such a clear form with his own 2 eyes. Damn it! Myosin cursed harshly inwardly. There was no way his spiritual sight would suddenly heighten. This demon must be of a much higher level and possess a stronger, vengeful spirit than he could handle. That was why it could manifest its own form like this. Clang, throwing away the sword, Myosin formed hand seals. Papak Lin Chinese letter, Papak Bing Chinese letter, Papak Du Chinese letter, Papak Zhu Chinese letter, Papa Papak. Along with that, Myosin, who had formed sword seals and the diamond fist mudra, chanted an incantation towards the demon. All palaces' mighty spirits, the great Yin soldiers and generals appear in the 5 classics. I call out once to the master of the household gods, evil demons, ghosts, and monsters, get out and leave. He was in the middle of chanting the incantation. At that moment, the demon in the form of a demonic monk approached him, moving like mist. Swish. It's useless. He had the 7 stars descending talisman attached to his chest to protect his body. Although exorcism would be difficult, it was impossible for this demon to directly affect him. Thwack. Ugh! At that moment, Myosin, who was hit in the face, had no choice but to stop chanting the incantation. It wasn't just that it hurt, but Myosin blinked in surprise. How? The one who hit him was none other than Mok Jeong-un. How was he moving when he should have been unable to control his body after being possessed by the demon in the Manor Master? He should have been suppressed by the Suppress talisman. Myosin's eyes, which had been bewildered, wavered as they discovered something. A hazy black thread was flowing from Mok Jeong-un's chest, connecting to the demonic monk demon. Seeing this, Myosin realized something had gone wrong. How could this happen? What that meant was one thing. The fact that the souls were connected meant it was a familiar. A familiar literally means to make an otherworldly being belong to and follow oneself. But the reason Myosin was surprised was simple. How did he do it to a demon? That demon was a vengeful spirit. It was a soul that had become a lump of resentment to resolve its grudges, and they didn't follow people. It wouldn't be strange to call them evil. Occasionally, among excellent diviners, there were those who controlled familiar, but those were old things. Or a kind of benevolent, mischievous spirit. It doesn't make sense. But how could such an evil demon filled with killing intent become a familiar? Moreover, that guy wasn't even someone who had learned divination techniques or Taoism. It was completely incomprehensible. If an ordinary person was possessed by a demon of that level, it would be normal for them to have their body taken over or lose their life. How? Can I remove this? What? Just then, Mok Jeong-un reached out and removed something from his chest. The fluttering yellow paper was none other than, the 7 stars descending talisman. At this, Myosin's eyes widened. It was that talisman that protected him from the demon, but if that was removed, swish. The pale, giant demonic monk was approaching with a ghastly smile. Surprised by this, Myosin hurriedly tried to form seals to chant a protective incantation instead of the talisman. However, thwack. Ugh! Mok Jeong-un kicked him in the abdomen. Myosin, who was hit in the abdomen, collapsed in a shrimp-like posture due to the pain that felt like his internal organs were turned inside out. He tried to form seals again while suppressing the urge to vomit, but... Gah! Myosin's waist bent in the opposite direction. His face darkened and his veins bulged. Thump! Thump! Myosin could tell. The demon had entered his body and was trying to kill him. If he didn't quickly form seals and use divination techniques, he might be devoured by the demon and lose his life. Myosin tried to form a seal with one hand, mustering all his strength. But then, squish, Mok Jong-un stepped on that hand of his, so that he couldn't do anything. Surprised, Myosin panted and pleaded with all his might. "Huff, huff, why, young master, please spare me. Please, if you just let me live, I'll do anything." "I don't need that. If it's because I tricked you." "No." Mok Jong-un shook his head. "You did it to survive, so what can you do about it? But you also heard where the seal and secret manual are, right?" At this, Myosin was at a loss for words. Separate from him deceiving and whatnot, wasn't Mok Jong-un saying that he had already intended to kill him? Looking at him with an absurd expression, Mok Jong-un smiled and said, "So just die." Shivers. His mouth was smiling, but his eyes were motionless like a dead person. That appearance felt even more eerie than the demon. "Gah, gah!" Blood flowed from Myosin's mouth, his entire face bulging with veins. Then his body that had been convulsing gradually stopped. Chapter 12. Demonic Monk 2. Ugh! The middle-aged man, with a scar under his left eye, sitting cross-legged on the floor while eating a sweet, sighed as he looked towards the pavilion leading to the main hall. The pavilion, usually guarded by escort warriors, was empty. Is this really okay? His name was Jang Myung-in. He held the position of Inner Manor Master, the head of security for the main hall at Yon Mok Sword Manor. In his youth, he was a renowned expert in martial arts near Zhaoxing, Zhejiang. 19 years ago, during a pirate suppression campaign in the Heyang region, he formed a connection with the Manor Master and joined Yon Mok Sword Manor. Manor Master. The Manor Master of his younger days was a true hero. Jang Myung-in admired him and believed everything he did was right. But how did things end up like this? Inner Manor Master. You don't really wish for that lowly courtesan's son to inherit the position of the great Yon Mok Sword Manor, do you? Think carefully about what's best for Yon Mok Sword Manor. At first, he tried not to get involved. However, he couldn't help but be swayed by the words of the first wife, Lady Siak. Even if Mok Yuchen, the youngest son, had overwhelmingly superior martial arts, he lacked a strong foundation and allies within the family. If he were to inherit the clan, it would eventually lead to the division of Yon Mok Sword Manor. Yes, this is the right thing to do. Even if the eldest son, Mok Young-ho, was somewhat tyrannical, he was still the firstborn. His maternal family was none other than the Jinhua Siak clan, more than capable of supporting him. In many ways, it was right for him, as the eldest son, to be the successor. However, there was one thing that bothered him. Even the physician couldn't do anything. How could a mere diviner? It won't take long. Just pretend not to know for about an hour. He's a skilled diviner from Mengcheng. If he finds out, there will be no need to clash with the retainers and the second son, Mok Yunpyong. The Manor Master's seal. With the seal, one could appoint a successor. It could also prevent the division among the retainers. Is it possible? However, he couldn't shake off a hint of doubt. How could a mere diviner, who only dealt with sorcery, find a way to make the Manor Master, who was on the verge of drawing his last breath, reveal the location of the seal? It seemed like a waste of time with pointless actions. It can't be that they plan to intimidate the weakened Manor Master with medicine or something to find out, right? No matter how much the eldest son, Mok Young-ho, wanted to become the successor, that was unacceptable. It was a disgrace to the Manor Master, to whom he had pledged his loyalty. Clench. Jang Myung-in's hand clenched tightly. No, that's not it. Although he was told to keep the surroundings empty for about an hour, he decided to check just in case. They told him not to interfere, so there shouldn't be any significant issues if he just took a look. With that thought, Inner Manor Master Jang Myung-in passed the pavilion and headed towards the main hall. Swish! Mok Jong-un grabbed the neck of the diviner Myosin, whose veins were bulging grotesquely. Myosin's pulse had stopped, his breath cut off. Confirming this, Mok Jong-un turned around with an expressionless face. Not bad. It didn't look like he had died by human hands. A mysterious death. That's how Myosin's death appeared. Whoosh! At that moment, a pale, giant monk appeared above the dead Myosin. A string of clattering skull beads hung around his neck. Mok Jong-un reached out and touched them. The monk's eerie, ghostly white eyes, emitting a sinister light, trembled. "You wear interesting things around your neck." The reason was simple. It allowed direct contact with Mok Jong-un's ethereal form. As Mok Jong-un fiddled with the skull beads, he asked, "You said you'd be a faithful slave, so what should I call you?" The giant monk, who had been standing still, mumbled something softly in response to Mok Jong-un's question. His lips barely seemed to move. This was not something that could be heard by human ears. However, Mok Jong-un heard it clearly. "Demonic monk sounds more like a title than a name. Well, as long as I can call you something, it doesn't matter." The strange being referred to itself as the demonic monk one. Looking at demonic monk, Mok Jong-un smirked and turned his head to look at the unconscious manor master whose arm had been severed. Mok Jong-un stroked his own chin. He was contemplating whether it would be better to kill the manor master or keep him alive. The contemplation didn't last long. If he were to kill the manor master immediately, it would put him in a difficult position, so it was better to keep him alive. Then we need to change the scenario a bit. "Demonic monk, can you move him in front of the manor master?" In response to Mok Jong-un's words, the demonic monk who had been standing still shook his head. Mok Jong-un muttered with a hint of disappointment, "You can't do it." He thought that since the demonic monk had killed the diviner, he would be able to exert physical strength, but unexpectedly he couldn't perform such a simple physical task. Or was he pretending not to be able to do it on purpose? Moreover, whoosh. The moment the materialized part of his body was exposed to sunlight, it disappeared like a mirage. The phenomenon was similar to a shadow vanishing in the light. It's a difficult domain to understand. It was intriguing but hard to comprehend. Mok Jong-un's gaze turned to the bookshelf of the dead diviner Myosin. Various books related to sorcery were placed there. If he referred to those, could he gain a better understanding of this strange being? Thump, thump. At that moment, the sound of someone walking on the wooden floor outside the room could be heard. Soon, the voice of the escort guard came from outside the room. "Is it not finished yet? Come in." At those words, the escort guard opened the door and entered. The guard's eyes widened upon entering the room. What is this?" The guard was startled by the sight of the dead diviner Myosin. He expected Myosin to be performing sorcery, but seeing him dead in the meantime was quite shocking. Strangely, the escort guard didn't seem to notice the demonic monk. Mok Jong-un pointed to the left side with a nod and asked, "Do you see anything here?" "Pardon? It seems you can't see it." "Ah, I see. Pardon?" "No, I wasn't talking to you, guard." At those words, the guard frowned. Then was he just talking to himself? While the guard was puzzled, Mok Jong-un looked to his left and spoke incomprehensible words. "No, I don't think there's a need to reveal yourself." "Young master, what are you talking about?" Mok Jong-un smiled at the confused guard and said, "Don't worry about it. Rather, could you move that diviner over there in front of the manor master?" "No, young master. Why is the diviner?" The state of the dead diviner Myosin was extremely bizarre. The veins on his entire face were grotesquely bulging, and he was dead, his expression filled with pain, shock, and fear. How was he murdered? Is this what it looks like to be murdered? Poison. It was strange to call it poison. It was extraordinarily grotesque. Could it be that this fellow didn't kill him? Even if his blood was toxic, it was quite different from that. It didn't seem like he was killed by physical means either, so what was it? While the guard was puzzled, Mok Jong-un spoke. "Instead of just staring, could you move him?" "Why, yes, yes." When Mok Jong-un repeated the same words twice, the guard hastily moved the dead diviner Myosin in front of the manor master, sensing the impatience. Then Mok Jong-un said, "Place him there as naturally as possible, as if he died while going berserk on his own." What? How was he supposed to place the body to make it look like he died while going berserk on his own? The guard, at a loss, simply laid Myosin's corpse down haphazardly. He did as he was told, but what was the intention? Could it be that he's trying to make it seem like the diviner did all this? Looking at the state of the messy room, it did seem plausible. The only fortunate thing was that the manor master was still alive. Although his arm was severed, it was better than being dead. "Young master, what will you do now?" "Ah, I forgot something important." In response to the guard's question, Mak Jong-un picked up the sword that had fallen on the floor. With the sword in hand, Mak Jong-un approached the bed where the manor master lay and swung it back and forth. Swish, swish. "Let's do it like this." The diviner, who was trying to treat the manor master with sorcery, was possessed by an evil spirit, severed the manor master's arm, and tried to kill him, but we stopped him. The escort guard clicked his tongue inwardly at those words. He had come up with a plausible excuse to escape the situation. Indeed, looking at the bizarre way the diviner Myo-sin had died, it did seem as if he had been possessed by something. However, will they easily believe it? The first wife was not a woman to be trifled with. Just as the guard was contemplating whether to simply not say anything, he cautiously spoke. "Young master, if we try to deceive them clumsily, it may arouse suspicion." "Is it clumsy?" It was truly a coincidence, but if we say that we appeared at the perfect moment to save the manor master, the first wife will not easily accept it. Moreover, this diviner was hired by her, so even more so. "I see. We need to make it more believable." Swish. At that moment, Mak Jong-un gripped the sword's handle in reverse. The guard was wondering what he was trying to do when suddenly, Mak Jong-un brought the tip of the sword to his own thigh. "Why, young master, what are you doing?" "We need to make it more believable. This should be enough." Wait. Before the guard could stop him, the sharp blade pierced through Mak Jong-un's thigh. The guard's expression stiffened at the sight. He wasn't just pinching himself, but stabbing his own thigh with a sword. Was there not a moment of hesitation? What was even more absurd was that despite the pain he must have felt, Mak Jong-un didn't let out a single groan. No, there was no change in his expression. Does he not feel pain? Even the guard himself would have gritted his teeth or made a grimace to endure the pain. Yet this fellow showed almost no change in his expression, as if he felt no pain at all. Ruthless bastard. The guard couldn't help but be astonished. It was remarkable that he stabbed his own thigh without hesitation to avoid suspicion, but he was truly a cold-blooded person. There was no need to go this far. This is the most effective way. "I'll stop the bleeding." "No, I need to lose more blood to look a bit pale." The guard found this fellow increasingly frightening and terrifying. Someone this crazy should never be made an enemy. Bang. At that moment, the door swung open and someone barged in. The guard was startled to see who it was. "Inner manor master?" The middle-aged man with a scar under his left eye was none other than Inner Manor Master Jang Myung-in. It wasn't really surprising. As the head of security for the main hall, he was originally supposed to be stationed here. Rather, it was strange that he had been absent from his post. "Ching!" Inner Manor Master Jang Myung-in drew his sword from his waist and pointed it at them. "What have you done?" In response to his rebuke, the escort guard waved his hands. "Inner Manor Master, it's a misunderstanding. The young master and I," before he could even offer an explanation, "more importantly, we need to take care of the manor master first." Thud. Mak Jong-un collapsed beside him, swaying. The escort guard was momentarily at a loss for words upon seeing this. Did he just pretend to faint? And while saying that the manor master's well-being should be prioritized over his own. Chapter 13, Demonic Monk 3. How can this be? Physician No couldn't hide his astonishment as he checked the pulse. Just this morning, it seemed as if the manor master's pulse would stop at any moment. But now, there was vitality as his pulse beat, in just a few hours. His complexion has improved too. The symptoms of unknown cause had all disappeared. Although he had weakened somewhat from lying unconscious in bed for a long time, there was a high possibility of recovery if he recuperated well. However, the problem is his consciousness. The manor master had been unconscious for quite a while. Because he hadn't regained consciousness, the Yon Mok Sword Manor was in turmoil over the issue of succession. Since he was recovering, there was a high probability of him waking up, but it was uncertain when that would be. If something were to happen to him before then, at that moment, a sharp female voice reached his ears. "How is he?" Physician No slowly raised his head. The voice belonged to the first wife, Lady Siak. Her expression was different from usual. Just this morning, her eyes were filled with arrogance and determination. Physician No had felt an ominous premonition. Something is off. Physician No sensed that the situation was unusual. When he had hurried here, the manor master's arm was severed, and the surroundings were filled with traces of sorcery, such as talismans and red threads. But the diviner who had performed the sorcery was found dead. The third young master was involved in the process. What on earth is happening? Physician No cautiously observed Lady Siak's eyes. Her eyes were trembling strangely. It was the kind of reaction that would appear when something had gone wrong. Things must not have gone as planned. Although the manor master's arm was severed, his complexion had improved significantly. As Lady Siak was also a martial artist, she would have learned martial arts and be able to assess his condition to some extent. If so, she would have already noticed that the situation had improved compared to the morning. Yet she showed no signs of joy, which meant, could it be that she wasn't trying to heal him through the diviner, but rather plotting something with sorcery? It wasn't far-fetched to think so. Everyone knew that the manor master was considering the youngest young master, Mok Yuchen, as his successor. In fact, from the perspective of the first wife, she wouldn't want the manor master to wake up. Has his condition improved a bit? When Lady Siak asked again, Physician No hesitated for a moment. In this room, there were only the two of them. If he were to tell her that the manor master would wake up soon, he feared that Lady Siak might do something unexpected. After pondering, Physician No cautiously spoke. His complexion has brightened, and his pulse has improved, but his condition is still poor. It's because the illness has been prolonged. It's best to consider it as a momentary resurgence before death. Ah, momentary resurgence before death. It was a saying that referred to a brief surge of vitality before death, likening it to the sky brightening momentarily just before sunset. In fact, it wasn't true, but he deliberately said so. However, Physician No was inwardly exasperated. Although she let out a sigh as if she was saddened, Lady Siak's expression and eyes were closer to relief. It was undoubtedly because she didn't want the manor master to recover. Physician No looked at the manor master and spoke inwardly. Manor master, there's no time. You must wake up. Otherwise, there was no telling what Lady Siak might do. Lady Siak, the first wife, regained her usual arrogant expression as she stepped outside. As she exited to the wooden porch, inner manor master Jang Myung-in, the one-eyed female warrior Ho-Ying who served as her escort, and two maids were waiting for her. Lady Siak approached inner manor master Jang Myung-in and spoke. Is the cause of death certain? In response to that question, inner manor master Jang Myung-in nodded and quietly replied. It's certain. He didn't die from physical trauma. I've seen countless corpses for a long time, but that... Jang Myung-in gestured with his eyes to where the corpse of the dead diviner Myo-sin lay. It was covered with a rough cloth, but the exposed skin was grotesquely bulging with veins. Even she had never seen such a corpse before. Lady Siak turned her head away from the corpse and asked in a low voice, What did they say? According to the escort warrior, he came to visit the sick. Visit the sick? Yes. Then the diviner went berserk as if possessed by something, severed the manor master's arm, and tried to kill him. What a mess. I apologize. I should have at least guarded the entrance of the pavilion. Jang Myung-in bowed and apologized. She shook her head at this. What can be done about what has already happened? But do you really think so? What do you mean by think so? Do you really believe that the child came to visit the sick and accidentally discovered it? Based on the state of the corpse and the circumstances, it seems to be the case. Seems to be? Young Master Mok Jong-un even suffered an injury where his thigh was pierced by a sword. The bleeding was severe and it could have been dangerous. From Jang Myung-in's perspective, that was the case. An injury of that degree was difficult to self-inflict. If it had been a slight cut by a sword without danger or minimal bleeding, it could be doubted, but this left no room for suspicion. Despite this explanation, she still didn't let go of her doubtful gaze. Seeing this, Jang Myung-in understood. It was because she viewed all the young masters, except for the eldest, unfavorably. At that moment, she asked, Where is that child now? Pardon. I'm talking about Mok Jong-un. Ah, I hurriedly stopped the bleeding for the third young master, but I sent him to the infirmary for treatment. The infirmary? Yes. Her gaze turned towards the infirmary located on the west side of the main building. Soon her footsteps followed her gaze. A pleasant scent. Mok Jong-un sniffed and smiled. The scent of various medicinal herbs, which he hadn't smelled in a long time since descending the mountain, immersed him in nostalgia. Memories of following his grandfather to gather medicinal herbs. Recalling those fresh and beautiful memories, conflicting emotions welled up in a corner of his heart once again. The demonic monk's eyes, with only white pupils, flickered with interest. It was influenced by the intense killing intent. Ordinary killing intent wasn't particularly influential to ghosts, but what emanated from Mok Jong-un was different. It was so intense that even ghosts found it unpleasant. It was a darkness qualitatively different from the resentment created by the environment. It was almost primitive in nature. At that moment, Mok Jong-un asked in a low voice, "So, did you find it?" The demonic monk nodded in response to that question. "Where is it?" The demonic monk pointed to a wall filled with medicinal herb drawers. At first glance, the entire wall seemed to be filled with drawers for storing medicinal herbs. But the demonic monk pointed there. The medicinal herb drawer that the demonic monk pointed to had Ouyang 1 written on it. When the bark of the parasol tritu was dried in a shaded place for a long time, it became a medicinal herb called Ouyang, which wasn't commonly used. It makes sense. They deliberately targeted a medicinal herb drawer that wasn't frequently used. The reason Mok Jong-un had the demonic monk confirm this was because of the words that had come from the manor master's mouth. Medicinal, hall, underground, Chinese letter Jiang, stone, door, inside, however, there was no entrance leading underground inside the infirmary. He had expected that to be the case. If it was a valuable item that a woman like the first wife would target, there was no way it would be placed where everyone could see it. Well, I'll find out when I check. Mok Jong-un surveyed his surroundings. Currently, the infirmary was filled with people working there, including the pharmacist. With many eyes watching and ears listening, it seemed difficult to verify. It seemed that he would have to wait until late at night. Just then, creak. The one who opened the door and entered the infirmary was none other than guard Go-chan. Go-chan approached Mok Jong-un. Mok Jong-un said to him, "You're a bit late." At those words, Go-chan almost frowned for a moment. The task Mok Jong-un had assigned him wasn't as simple as fetching water. It wasn't a task that could be done in an instant, yet he complained about being late. It was truly unfair. "Where is it?" In response to Mok Jong-un's question, Go-chan took out 2 books from his bosom. "Only 2 books," Go-chan grumbled at Mok Jong-un's disappointed tone. "These were secretly removed before they were burned." "Before they were burned?" "Yes, the escort warriors guarding the main building are burning the diviner's bookshelf and all his belongings." "Oh, really?" Mok Jong-un clicked his tongue regretfully at those words. He had been interested in the diviner's sorcery and wanted to examine the books he possessed. But among the many books, only 2 were salvaged. Synopsis of various philosophers, basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang 3. Introductory writings on the strange and unusual 4, those were the titles of the 2 books. Go-chan had managed to remove the 2 thickest books among the ones he had seen. It seemed he would have to be satisfied with these, as disappointing as it was. Good work. "But young master, why do you need the books the diviner had?" Go-chan stopped mid-sentence. Then he put the books he was about to hand over to Mok Jong-un back into his bosom. Mok Jong-un looked at him with a puzzled expression, wondering why he did that. But soon he understood the reason. "Step back for a moment." Yes. As new footsteps approached from outside the infirmary and said something, the escort warriors guarding the entrance vacated their positions. Creak. As the door opened, someone revealed themselves. It was a middle-aged lady dressed in fancy attire adorned with precious metals. Go-chan, surprised, bowed his head and greeted her. "Greetings to the First Madam." First Madam, she was none other than Lady Seok, the first wife of the Yon Mok Sword Manor. Mok Jong-un's eyes flickered with interest. She was the woman mentioned in the information file given by Guard Gam. It was stated that Lady Siak, the first madam, was more dangerous and needed more caution than the eldest young master, Mok Yong-ho. She was from the martial arts family of Jinhua Siaka clan and had considerable martial arts skills. She was also described as a cunning woman. Oh my, Go-chan was equally perplexed by her appearance. Although Mok Jong-un's appearance was indistinguishable from the real one, Guard Gam had strongly advised to avoid meeting people from the Mok family as much as possible to prevent any unexpected situations. It is the first madam's order. Everyone leave. At the command of Hong, the one-eyed female warrior escorting Lady Siak, everyone in the infirmary went outside. Rustle, rustle. As everyone was sent out, Guard Go-chan sensed that something was wrong. He had never directly clashed with her, so he had no idea what this was about. At that very moment, Lady Siak approached Mok Jong-un, who had only raised his upper body on the bed. Go-chan hurriedly gestured with his eyes. Greet her. Greet her. Understanding this, Mok Jong-un clasped his hands together and bowed his head in greeting. Please forgive me for not being able to stand up due to my injured leg. He greeted her better than expected. However, the critical point was from here on. The stark difference between the fake and the real one was the voice and manner of speaking. Fortunately, this fake Mok Jong-un had a similar voice to the dead, real Mok Jong-un, so it sounded somewhat similar during practice, but he was worried if it would work. Although the young masters, except for the eldest, rarely have direct encounters with the first madam, Lady Siak was more sensitive and suspicious than expected. If they were exposed here, the worst situation might unfold. At that moment, Lady Siak, who had approached right in front of him, spoke. I'm not here just to receive a mere greeting. Phew, for a moment, Go-chan almost let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it seemed that Lady Siak hadn't noticed. It seemed that the fake was more indistinguishable from the real one than expected. It was still like walking on thin ice, but if they didn't make mistakes, they could overcome this moment. Squeeze. Go-chan's eyes widened. It was because Lady Siak suddenly pressed on Mok Jong-un's injured thigh. Mok Jong-un lowered his head as if in pain and let out a groan. Arg! D-damn it! Go-chan couldn't hide his perplexity at the sight. It seemed that the issue wasn't whether he was real or fake. Judging by her attitude, she was suspicious of whether Mok Jong-un was truly injured or not. What did you see and hear there? Squeeze. Ugh! Lady Siak pressed even harder on Mok Jong-un's wound and spoke. Seeing this, Go-chan couldn't sit still. That crazy bastard couldn't possibly endure the pain. But if he made a slip of the tongue in this situation, not only would it arouse the first madam's suspicion, but it would also make her an enemy. Madam, there seems to be some misunderstanding. Xing. As Go-chan stepped forward to stop her, Hong, Lady Siak's escort warrior, drew her sword and pointed it at his neck. Don't interfere. Damn that wench, Go-chan was at a loss for what to do. If he couldn't speak, Mok Jong-un had to handle this situation alone. Now he had to endure and lower his head to escape this situation. Hong, the escort warrior of Lady Siak, was glaring at him, so he couldn't even exchange glances or mouth words anymore. Squeeze! At that moment, Lady Siak pressed even harder on Mok Jong-un's thigh and urged. You may not know, but it's rare for a diviner with that level of skill to die by being possessed by an evil spirit while performing sorcery. Yet you say that the diviner was possessed by something, severed the manor master's wrist, and tried to harm him, but you stopped it. Did you think I would easily believe? Snicker. Lady Siak furrowed her brows at the sound coming from Mok Jong-un's mouth. Just a moment ago he had been in pain, but did he just sneer now? If she hadn't misheard, that was the sound of a sneer. Did you just? At that moment, Mok Jong-un slowly raised his head. Seeing Mok Jong-un smiling with the corners of his mouth lifted, Lady Siak was momentarily dumbfounded. Had this fellow gone insane? No, what are you doing now? Guard Go-chan was equally perplexed. In a situation where he should be keeping his head down to avoid suspicion, what was he doing? As expected, Lady Siak spoke in a voice filled with anger. If you truly... Let's not waste each other's energy on pointless things. What? You need the Manor Master's seal, don't you? Chapter 14. Negotiation 1. At those words that came out of Mok Jong-un's mouth, Guard Go-chan's expression stiffened. The Manor Master was safe, so there was no need to hide it, but Go-chan never expected Mok Jong-un to directly mention it. No, how did he really want to provoke the first Madam, Lady Seok, that badly? That was practically her secret. Revealing that he knew about it could easily lead to his death in this very place. Damn it! Go-chan, tensed up, glanced at Lady Seok. As expected, Lady Seok's expression had turned even more venomous than usual. However, anger didn't immediately pour out of her mouth. That was because this bastard, from the beginning, she had come here because she suspected that Mok Jong-un might have seen or found out something. But Mok Jong-un's attitude was completely unexpected, admitting that he knew her secret was no different from asking to be killed. What is his intention? Did this wretched fellow think he had the upper hand because he held her weakness, making him act boldly? If that was the case, he had made a grave mistake. In any case, this fellow was also someone who needed to be dealt with if Mok Yong-ho became the Manor Master. Grab. Lady Seok's hand swiftly grabbed Mok Jong-un's neck like a snake targeting its prey. Seeing her movement, Guard Go-chan could be certain. She, hailing from the martial arts family of Jinhwa-won Seok clan, was definitely a first-rate expert. No one but Master Gam could match her. That also meant that Mok Jong-un couldn't handle her. Huh. Mok Jong-un's eyes flickered with interest as his neck was grabbed. He was inwardly surprised by her unexpectedly strong force and unique hand technique. Is this woman strong? The information file stated that she would have considerable martial arts skills, as she was from the Jinhua Seok clan. But if she was this strong, she was much more powerful than Go-chan. Interesting. Lady Seok's wrist was extremely slender. It was no different from any other woman's, yet it possessed such strength. Indeed, the power of martial arts was mysterious. Seeing Mok Jong-un's reaction, Lady Seok's eyes narrowed. This fellow? She had grabbed his neck to intimidate him, implying that she could take his life at any moment, but far from being afraid, he didn't even show a hint of perplexity. She hadn't seen him often because he wasn't her own child, but did this child have this much guts? Rather, she knew him to be the most timid among his half-siblings. You! That single word that came out of Lady Seok's mouth. Hearing it, Guard Go-chan swallowed his saliva. Could it be that they were exposed? Come to think of it, wouldn't a first-rate expert be able to discern whether the other person had learned martial arts or not just by grabbing their neck? However, were you hiding your true colors? At those words that came out of Lady Seok's mouth, Go-chan was dumbfounded. Should he consider this fortunate, or should he see it as having aroused even more suspicion? She didn't seem to doubt him, but it appeared that Lady Seok had perceived it negatively. So this was your true self? At that moment, Mok Jong-un spoke. That's not important right now. What? If the Manor Master were to pass away, it would be difficult for the eldest young master to become the Manor Master. You bastard, Squeeze. Lady Seok's grip tightened even more. Impudent fellow, do you think I can't kill you right here? Who do you think you are, trying to negotiate with me? This is a bit painful. At Mok Jong-un's words, she furrowed her brows. With this much force on his neck, it should be difficult for him to breathe, but his expression didn't change much. Was he not in pain? While she was puzzled, Mok Jong-un said, I see negotiation requires a certain level of caution towards the other party. Caution? Do you think I would feel that towards the likes of you? Among the 4 sons of the Mok family, Mok Jong-un had the most insignificant martial arts skills. Moreover, his mother had passed away, and his maternal family was practically ruined, so what could make her feel cautious? Right at that moment, demonic monk. As soon as those words were uttered, flinch? Suddenly, a chilling sensation that made her spine shiver seized Lady Seok. Then, Lady Seok was suddenly pushed back as if she had collided with something. Whoosh! Lady Seok's eyes trembled as she was pushed back about 4 steps. What was that just now? Something had touched her, but it was invisible. In an instant, she raised her energy to create a reactive force as she was pushed, but the sensation was not just unpleasant, it even gave her goosebumps. Phew. At that moment, Mok Jong-un, who had raised his upper body, twisted his neck to loosen it. Crack, crack. Having someone grab your neck isn't a pleasant experience. At his relaxed tone, Lady Siak glared fiercely and spoke. What did you just do? What did I do? Just now, clearly. It was difficult to explain. Mok Jong-un hadn't directly done anything to her. But what was that bizarre sensation? As she struggled to understand, Mok Jong-un sat cross-legged on the bed and said, Are you now inclined to negotiate? Negotiate. Don't make me laugh. It seems you had a hidden trick up your sleeve, but do you think that kind of luck will continue like it did just now? Is it still not enough? Then shall we try with a maid? What? The left one seems good. What are you talking about, the left one? At the moment she was about to question him. Ah! Everyone's gaze turned towards the direction of the scream. Lady Siak's eyes trembled. No, not just her eyes, but the eyes of everyone in the infirmary widened. It was because one of the maids that Lady Siak had brought with her had floated up to a height of about 1 jang approx. 3.3 meters. MMPH? It seemed like she was trying to scream in surprise, but the maid's mouth was blocked as if something was covering it, making her mumble. At this sight, everyone was at a loss for words. What on earth was happening? Why was a perfectly fine maid floating up there by herself? This is impossible. Lady Siak's mind became complicated by this bizarre phenomenon. She had heard that among profound internal martial artists, there were those who could manipulate objects with their internal energy, or true Kai. But it was highly unlikely that this young fellow was such a profound internal martial artist. Moreover, if he had exerted such profound true Kai to lift the maid, she would have sensed some energy. What is this? Guard Go-chan was equally surprised. What was the meaning of this? Was this fake Mok Jong-un hiding such a strange ability? Swish. At that moment, Mok Jong-un casually raised a hand and made a gesture of slitting his throat. Right then, ack! As if being grabbed by something, the maid floating in midair had her facial veins bulging grotesquely and her eyes rolled back. It seemed like she would take her last breath at any moment. The image of the dead diviner's corpse flashed in Lady Siak's mind. Startled by the sight, Lady Siak shouted, Stop! What are you saying? It's obvious that you're doing this. I don't know what kind of sorcery this is, but stop it right now. Well, since I'm trying to prove that I'm qualified to negotiate with the First Madam, wouldn't it be okay to take the life of one person? Mok Jong-un smiled brightly. In contrast, Lady Siak's expression hardened even more. The maid, who seemed like she would take her last breath at any moment. If she were an ordinary maid, it would be one thing, but this girl had been serving Lady Siak since her main family, the Siaka clan. Clench. Biting her lip tightly, she shouted, Enough, stop it. I'll listen to what you have to say about negotiation or whatever, so stop it right now. At her words, Mok Jong-un lightly nodded. Then, thud. The maid, who was on the verge of taking her last breath, collapsed on the floor unconscious. Sowa! The other maid hurriedly checked on the condition of the unconscious girl. Fortunately, she let out a sigh of relief, indicating that her life wasn't in danger. Lady Siak was also relieved, but more than that, she became suspicious of Mok Jong-un's bizarre ability. What on earth was this? It was a power unrelated to Kai. It was closer to sorcery or a mysterious force. When did he learn such an eerie power? This bastard. Her mind was filled with doubts, but she couldn't figure out what this power was at the moment, so it was too risky to confront him recklessly. To do that, she should have brought only escort warriors who knew martial arts. Lady Siak, who had been glaring at Mok Jong-un, opened her mouth. Do you want to negotiate? Since the Manor Master will pass away today or tomorrow, don't you need the Manor Master's seal? She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. In the first place, there was no reason to deny it. It was the only way to ensure the succession. However, something didn't make sense to her. If you knew that, you could have kept it hidden, so why are you telling me? Why am I telling you? Yes, you're also from the Mok family, so you should want to become the Manor Master. This was where she became suspicious. She couldn't understand why he was bringing up something that he could have kept hidden. If he used the Manor Master's seal, he could gain the support of the retainers. But I don't particularly want to become the Manor Master. What? At those words that came out of Mok Jong-un's mouth, Lady Seok was momentarily speechless. He didn't want to become the manor master. He could become the head of a prestigious martial arts family that wielded power in the northern part of Anhui province, yet he didn't desire that. Are you expecting me to believe that? You don't believe me. Would you believe it if you were in my position? No, I wouldn't. You might think I'm lying. If there's no convincing reason. Firstly, as I said earlier, I have no interest in it, and secondly, I don't want to get involved in the succession battle and fight. How about that? You don't want to fight? Yes, to be precise, I have no interest, and I don't want to waste time on unnecessary things. At Mok Jong-un's words, she frowned. Was this fellow now considering the matter of determining the head of the great Yon Mok sword manor a waste of time? How much effort had she put in to make her own son, Mok Yong-ho, become the manor master? It was absurd in a different sense. Lady Seok stared intently at Mok Jong-un and said, "If you truly don't want anything, tell me the location of the manor master's seal and the secret manual. Then I'll believe that you've really given up." At her words, Mok Jong-un scoffed. "I can't do that." "Then I can't fully believe your words. Don't believe me, then. In that case, I'll make the same offer to the second young master." "What?" For a moment, Lady Seok's composure wavered. "What are you saying?" "It's exactly as you heard. Since the first madam seems to have trouble understanding, let me explain kindly. I may not need it, but are you and the eldest young master, Mok Yong-ho, the only ones who want the manor master's seal?" Her expression completely hardened. Seeing this, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, "It seems you now realize who holds the hilt of the sword." A city in Hebei province, right arrow curving left, chapter 15. Negotiation 2. Bang! Upon returning to her residence, Hyewa Hall, the first Madam Lady Seok kicked a chair violently. The chair, infused with internal energy, split in half. Her face flushed red, she panted heavily. How dare he? Even when she was in the infirmary, she had tried her best to suppress her anger. But now that things had turned out like this, it was difficult to contain her rage. "Madam, please calm down." Hong, the escort warrior, cautiously tried to dissuade Lady Seok. In response, she spoke in an irritated voice. "Calm down. Do I look like I can calm down right now? I finally found and brought a skilled diviner, but instead, that outrageous fellow got his hands on the seal, Arg." "Madam," Lady Seok grabbed the back of her neck. As her blood pressure rose, she closed her eyes, perhaps feeling dizzy. In fact, even though she kept the second son, the most cunning among the Mok family's children and the youngest son, whom the manor master favored, in check, she had paid no attention to the third son, Mok Jong-un. He had no talent in martial arts, and it was no exaggeration to say that his maternal family was almost ruined. Therefore, she had not paid any attention to him. But who would have thought that the fellow, who was never even considered, would turn out to be such a hidden threat? Clench. Lady Seok gritted her teeth. She had not anticipated that the fellow would negotiate like this over the manor master's seal. She had thought that he would readily spill the information with just a little intimidation. Was he always like this? The Mok Jong-un she knew did not have such a cunning side. Rather, he was close to being a coward and a scaredy cat. There were many anecdotes about him. Was he hiding his true self? Come to think of it, until his birth mother died, he was constantly described as being quite intelligent, if not a genius. Perhaps he did that to protect himself after that incident. If that was the case, he might be someone to be even more wary of. Although he had stated that he had no interest in the position of manor master, those who knew how to hide themselves and had strong patience were all the more terrifying. And that power, that bizarre power, bothered her. The maid Sowa had suddenly floated up, her veins bulging, and she was about to take her last breath. Seeing that, the image of the dead diviner Myoshin had come to her mind. Sowa's condition was very similar to his, if that was the case. That fellow must have killed the diviner Myoshin as well. Are you referring to that Mok Jong-un? Yes. It certainly made sense if that was the case. The diviner, who was brought in because of his rumored skill, couldn't possibly have been possessed by an evil spirit and gone on a rampage. It had to be the doing of that Mok Jong-un. At Lady Seok's conviction, the escort warrior Hong leaped up. How dare he kill someone you summoned? Leave it to your subordinate. Before he can even use his sorcery, I will. Stop. But if the Manor Master's seal really ends up in the hands of the second son, Mok Yunpyong, or the youngest son, Mok Yuchen, my son will have to bear the consequences. But if we let that fellow lead us around, who said anything about being led around? Pardon. Lady Siak took something out of a white porcelain vase on a shelf in the corner of the room. It was a small bead made of jade. The bead had a unique pattern engraved on it, and she handed it to the escort, Hong. What is this? Take this and go to the ghostly spirit Pavilion 1 in Mengchang, and inform the pavilion master about the fact that the diviner Myoshin was murdered. Ah, the escort Hoing, understanding her intention, nodded. Ghostly spirit pavilion. It was the group of diviners to which the deceased Myoshin belonged. Slap. Guard Go-chan's head turned to the side from the slap. Guard Gam clicked his tongue, looking at him with disappointment. Tusk, is it that difficult to monitor a mere novice? And no, it's not. I told you that you were allowed to subdue him, yet you took him to the main hall and back. Are you out of your mind to do such a thing? At Guard Gam's scolding words, Go-chan couldn't say anything. In fact, if it were up to him, he wanted to reveal everything that had happened while he was away. No, he had originally intended to do so, but now he was hesitant to do that. Why do I feel so uneasy? With just martial arts, Master Gam could easily deal with that fellow whenever he wanted to. Yet, after experiencing the fake Mok Jong-un, he had become fearful of him. Not only did he have toxicity in his blood and that eerie sorcery, but what bothered him even more was that the fellow didn't seem human. If he carelessly made an enemy out of him, it seemed that the end wouldn't be good. Damn it. He didn't know what to make of this situation. When they found someone suitable to play the role of Mok Jong-un, it seemed good, but now he had no choice but to do as that impostor commanded. I trust that you will keep your mouth shut. Those words were quite ominous. Although the fellow was outside the infirmary and couldn't hear them, he strangely felt conscious of his presence. It was as if someone was watching him. Why was it like this? While he was engrossed in this strange feeling, Guard Gam, who had been clicking his tongue, spoke. If you let that fellow snoop around one more time, I won't let it slide. He won't be able to walk around easily for a while anyway with his thigh pierced. Whether it's his thigh or whatever, don't let him draw attention. I understand. Anyway, you're sure you weren't caught by the first madam, right? Yes, I'm certain. I was right beside him. However, the first madam was displeased because he visited the main hall. To be precise, he held the first madam's weakness and negotiated with her. Go-chan's mouth was parched. The boundary of whose side he was on had become blurred. To think that he had to hide half of the truth from Master Gam, who he should be telling the facts to. Tusk. Guard Gam shook his head from side to side. Indeed, that fellow was not suitable for the role. He had realized it when he killed the real Mok Jong-un on the spot, but as time passed, it would become more difficult to control him. We need to hurry. Even though he had warned him, if he continued to act on his own like this, things could go wrong later. A quick decision was needed on who to replace him with. Keep an eye on him without taking your eyes off him even for a moment. Won't you directly warn him? There are too many eyes watching. Inside the infirmary, there were pharmacists and attendants. Although they were mere servants, they were also in the position of escorts, so they couldn't interfere with them as they pleased, and they couldn't scold him in front of others, even if he was a fake. Moreover, he's cunning. It's not good to have a long conversation with that fellow. It was better to keep him in the dark about how the situation was unfolding. That way, it would be easier to replace him later and deal with him. Regardless of this conversation taking place outside, Mok Jong-un was comfortably leaning back and reading a book, flipping through the pages. It was the synopsis of various philosophers, basic writings of the school of yin and yang. As he was flipping through the books, a certain passage caught Mok Jong-un's interest. When a dead person becomes a wandering spirit and turns into a monster, the level of the monster varies depending on various conditions. The basic writings of the school of yin and yang had a surprisingly detailed description of monsters. Based on this, the demonic monk could be considered a type of ghost or evil spirit that had become a monster from a wandering spirit. Low-level and weak wandering spirits take the form of earthbound spirits and can only influence the living by stimulating their sixth sense. According to the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang, the levels of wandering spirits were divided into 7 stages. Putting aside various conditions and simply dividing the levels, the first level was the red spirit, an earthbound spirit that could influence the living by giving them goosebumps or a slight chill. The second level was the orange spirit. It could possess others, making their bodies feel heavy or causing them to feel sick enough to have a cold. The third level was the yellow spirit. From this level onwards, it was described as requiring exorcism as it was quite dangerous. In terms of level, a yellow spirit could not only weaken the possessed person but also lead them to death. Based on the level, the demonic monk is a yellow spirit. Even within the yellow spirit level, it was further divided into 3 stages based on the degree of danger. The lower stage could reveal its form and directly instill fear in humans. The middle stage could directly influence or inflict pain on living beings. The upper stage could kill the possessed person. Swoosh. At that moment, someone appeared like smoke, penetrating through the wall near the entrance of the infirmary. It was the demonic monk. Mok Jong-un didn't know, but it seemed that the demonic monk had a higher level than he thought. So that's what it meant by influencing living beings. He now understood why the demonic monk couldn't touch the corpse of the dead diviner Myoshin. It was because he was already dead. A dead body ultimately had no life, so it couldn't be influenced. I see. However, there were also things he learned that weren't described in the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang. He had the demonic monk target the first madam, Lady Siak. But the moment the demonic monk lightly touched her, Lady Siak instantly reacted and was pushed back. They said that woman was a first-rate expert. On the other hand, the first madam's maid didn't even notice until the demonic monk directly threatened her life and was helplessly affected. What was the difference between them? Was it because the maid hadn't learned martial arts? Could it be that the power of monsters doesn't work well on those who have learned martial arts? The basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang didn't mention that aspect. Creak! At that moment, Guard Go-chan opened the door of the infirmary and entered. Mok Jong-un slightly raised the corners of his mouth and muttered, "A good test subject." "Pardon?" Go-chan asked, puzzled. "I wasn't talking to you, Guard Go-chan. Shall we try lightly lifting your arm?" "Young master, what do you mean by that?" Right at that moment, flinch. Go-chan felt a chilling sensation throughout his body. It was a bizarre feeling that went beyond the realm of the 5 senses, which could be called the body's sensations. Lift. "Huh!" Go-chan's arm suddenly tried to lift upwards. "What?" The startled Go-chan sent his internal energy to resist it. However, Go-chan's arm, which was trembling as he resisted, couldn't hold out for long and was forcibly lifted up. "What is this?" Go-chan was utterly perplexed as he couldn't understand what was happening. But he soon realized why this was happening. "Why, young master?" Mok Jong-un gently waved his hand. Then, as if someone had let go of his wrist, Go-chan was able to lower his wrist that had been forcibly lifted. Although his wrist was lowered, Go-chan, who seemed very surprised, said to Mok Jong-un, "What on earth did you just do?" "I just needed to confirm something." "Confirm?" "Yes. Why did you do that to me? You were just the right fit. Aren't you a second-rate warrior, Guard Go-chan?" "That's right, but what exactly are you trying to confirm?" "You don't need to know." "Yeah, you won't tell me nicely anyway." Go-chan stood in front of the bed with a face that couldn't hide his discomfort. Damn that bastard. He slightly regretted that it might have been better to tell Master Gam exactly what had happened. Regardless of that, Mok Jong-un nodded to himself as if he had learned something. It works on Guard Go-chan. Go-chan also immediately noticed the moment the demonic monk grabbed his wrist. Perhaps because he had learned internal energy, his senses were definitely more sensitive than ordinary people. Although he resisted for a bit, he couldn't overcome the demonic monk's strength. The demonic monk's power works smoothly on ordinary people and up to second-rate warriors. That was the criterion for stable effectiveness. Although it hadn't been definitively verified yet, perhaps the power of a yellow-level monster might not have a significant effect on first-rate experts. If that was the case, it might be a bit disappointing. Well, even so, it's not like it's not useful. The demonic monk, a monster, had high utility in many ways. Just like how he had eavesdropped on the conversation between Go Chan and Guard Gam earlier, he could also send him to monitor if the distance was close, and it was good to send him for reconnaissance in blocked areas. How useful was that? Suddenly, as Mok Jong-un read the passages below in the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang, he had such a thought. It wouldn't be bad to obtain an even stronger monster. The 4th level green spirit too, very dangerous. Exorcism is a compulsory. A wandering spirit that has existed for more than several decades. It can influence surrounding objects and cause auditory hallucinations enough to confuse the living. Chapter 16. Negotiation 3. The second young master, Mok Yunpyong, had grand ambitions. From a young age, he not only mastered the sword techniques of the Yon Mok sword manner, but also the fist techniques of the Hwe Baikang family, his mother Lady Jiang's maternal family, demonstrating his exceptional martial arts talent. Therefore, he was confident that he would naturally become the next leader of the Yon Mok sword manner. The eldest legitimate son, Mok Yongho, was greedy and indulged in women and alcohol, lacking the qualities of a successor, so Mok Yunpyong believed that the order of succession would naturally fall to him. However, that was a miscalculation. Mok Yuchen. The leader's favor was with him, the youngest son. It was understandable, as he possessed innate martial arts talent, mastering all the martial arts of the Yon Mok sword manner at the mere age of 14 and reaching the level of a first-rate expert. As Mok Yuchen stood out, the leader kept delaying the decision on the succession. Mok Yunpyong was certain that the leader's heart was swayed towards him. I can't miss this opportunity. He considered the leader's life being in danger as an opportunity. Fortunately, Mok Yuchen was the son of a lowly concubine and had no power around him. Unless the leader directly declared him as the successor, he was in a position where it would be difficult for him to become the leader with his own strength. Therefore, the key was to eliminate the other candidates for succession. If I only consider them, no one can match me. Both of them were the epitome of incompetence. The eldest young master, Mok Yongho, only knew how to indulge in women and alcohol, while the third young master, Mok Jong-un, was an incompetent coward. However, behind Mok Yongho was the first madam, Lady Siak. As she was from the Jinhua Siak family, she held considerable power. Moreover, there were still many old fools among the retainers who advocated for the priority of the eldest son. Mok Jong-un, among the brothers, the one who was inferior in all aspects except for his face that resembled a courtesan's companion, had been coveting the position of successor for some time. The first madam looked down on him and paid no attention to him, but Mok Yunpyong was different. Was it Guard Gam? He had an escort who was beyond his station. He was called Guard Gam, and when Mok Yunpyong first saw him, his martial arts skills were extraordinary enough to request the leader to make him his escort. So, out of curiosity, he investigated his background and discovered quite an interesting fact. No, it should be called a fact that required caution. Because of this, Mok Yunpyong came to believe that he shouldn't carelessly let his guard down around the third young master, Mok Jong-un. However, an unexpected event occurred. Was the heavens helping him? You want to become my man? Mok Yunpyong barely managed to calm the corners of his twitching mouth. The man kneeling on one knee in front of him, paying his respects, was none other than Mok Jong-un's escort warrior, Guard Gam. The man he had wanted so much had come to him on his own, at a very opportune moment. Please accept me, young master. Seeing Guard Gam like this, Mok Yunpyong stroked his chin and spoke. Accept you, it's quite tempting. At Mok Yunpyong's words, Guard Gam inwardly thought that it was a good start. Guard Gam, who had planned to observe the leader's condition and the surrounding situation before making a decision, ultimately chose the second young master, Mok Yunpyong. The eldest, Mok Yongho, was too influenced by the first madam, and the youngest, Mok Yuchen, had nothing but his own martial prowess. Although he's cunning, he's actually easier to handle this way. Therefore, he chose Mok Yunpyong as an alternative to the dead, real Mok Jeong-un. Mok Yunpyong was cunning and suspicious, but Guard Gam was confident that he would accept him due to his greed for talent. However, the timing is quite exquisite. Pardon? As you know, I have a high regard for Guard Gam. But for you to ask me to accept you right before the succession competition, it makes me suspicious. As expected, at Mok Yunpyong's words, Guard Gam slightly nodded his head. He had already guessed that Mok Yunpyong, who was naturally skeptical, wouldn't believe him right away. I understand. However, I have a reason why I can no longer serve young Master Mok Jeong-un. A reason why you can't serve Mok Jeong-un? Yes. What is it? I can't tell you right away. At those words, Mok Yunpyong scoffed. What was the point of not revealing the reason why he couldn't serve him anymore? While Mok Yunpyong found it absurd, Guard Gam smiled brightly and said, "That's because it's one of Mok Jeong-un's weaknesses, so it's difficult for me to tell you right away. If you accept me, I can tell you as much as you want." "Ha, are you negotiating with me now? Please understand my situation." "Understand, then let's consider what you just said as something for the future. Can you tell me about his other weaknesses?" "Of course." "What are they?" "Young Master Mok Jeong-un currently cannot use martial arts at all." "What?" One of Mok Yunpyong's eyebrows twitched with interest. "Is that true? There's not a shred of falsehood. Did he suffer from a mental disorder?" "You could say it's similar. In fact, since he was a fake, he couldn't have learned martial arts in the first place. However, he couldn't publicize the fake Mok Jeong-un's death by revealing this fact, so he glossed over it." "Ha!" At Guard Gam's words, Mok Yunpyong's face brightened. That was to be expected, as the Yon Mok Sword Manor was a martial arts family. If the person who was to become the leader of a group that cultivated martial arts couldn't use martial arts, it was no different from losing the qualification to be the leader. You're saying that he lost his martial arts. He already lacked talent in martial arts, but if he couldn't use martial arts at all, the situation was different. He didn't even have the qualifications to participate in the succession competition. To Mok Yunpyong, who couldn't hide his joy, Guard Gam said, "If you accept me, I can provide you with even more useful information." At his words, Mok Yunpyong pretended to contemplate for a moment, then smirked and said, "I thought Guard Gam was playing the role of Huang Gai at the Red Cliffs." Desperate strategy. In the Battle of Red Cliffs, there was a story of Huang Gai, a retainer of Sun Quan of the Wu Kingdom, pretending to be tortured and falsely surrendering to Cao Cao of the Wei Kingdom. Mok Yunpyong had thought that Guard Gam might be a spy sent by Mok Jeong-un, knowing that he had coveted him for a long time. In response, Guard Gam chuckled and said, "I'm embarrassed to say this about my former master, but young Master Mok Jeong-un doesn't have the capacity to even think of such a strategy." "Ha ha ha, that's probably true. Then will you accept me?" "Of course, how can I let go of such a talented person?" At Mok Yunpyong's words, Guard Gam bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you for accepting me." "No, I should be the one thanking Guard Gam for making the right decision for the Yon Mok Sword Manor, but I'm sorry to ask you for a favor right after you've joined me." At those words, Guard Gam tapped his chest and spoke heartily. "Please give me any order." For now, he had to make a good impression on Mok Yunpyong. However, unexpected words came out of Mok Yunpyong's mouth. "I thought Guard Gam, who was once an assassin, would be more than capable of doing it." Guard Gam's expression stiffened. He had suspected it, but he didn't expect Mok Yunpyong to have investigated his past. He knew Mok Yunpyong was cunning, but he had considered him still a novice, so it seemed he had let his guard down. Late in the hour of the Zhu hour, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. It was a time when everyone was asleep, and even the escort warriors guarding the front of the infirmary were dozing off. Clatter! Oh-ho! When he opened the medicinal herb drawer labeled Oh-yang, a hidden entrance was revealed. Perhaps because it was a secret space, it didn't make as much noise as he had worried. Mok Jeong-un entered the hidden entrance with a lamp in hand. Crunch, crunch. He quietly descended the underground stairs. The stairs extended quite deep, more than he had expected. It's deep. It wasn't just one floor, but it went down more than 2 floors deep, which made him suspicious. It was quite deep for a space created to hide the leader's seal and a secret manual. When he had entered to a depth of about 3 floors, a cavity about 1/3 the size of the infirmary came into view. In the cavity, there were 4 entrances that looked like stone doors. And above the stone doors, the characters, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter 1 were engraved. Medicinal hall underground, Chinese letter Jiang, stone door inside. Mok Jong-un recalled what the leader had said. Since he had said it was inside the Jiang stone door among the 4 passages, there was no need to examine the other passages first. He could just enter that one. Mok Jong-un approached the Jiang Chinese letter stone door. When he opened the stone door, a straight tunnel passage was revealed. About 20 steps, that was roughly the distance. Mok Jong-un, who was about to step inside, put his raised foot back on the ground and stopped. It was because he suddenly noticed something on the ceiling of the tunnel passage. What is that? On the bumpy ceiling of the tunnel passage, there were holes large enough to insert 2 or 3 fingers if he reached out his hand. If there was only one, it might not have been noticeable, but they were located at regular intervals along the passage, extending all the way inside. Puzzled by this, Mok Jong-un surveyed his surroundings. He noticed a few fist-sized stones on one side of the cavity, just in case. Mok Jong-un picked up a stone and tapped it on his hand, then threw it inside the passage. Clack. Before the stone could even roll on the ground, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At that moment, sharp spears shot out from the right and left sides of the floor. If he had entered without knowing, his legs or thighs would have been pierced by the spears. Seeing this, Mok Jong-un raised one corner of his mouth. Interesting. Did they install such traps because they were afraid that someone might steal the seal and the secret manual? It seemed quite excessive for that purpose. Was the seal and the secret manual really inside? Mok Jong-un, who had been staring into the tunnel, clenched and unclenched his hands repeatedly. I'll know when I see it. For now, he had to go inside to find out. Mok Jong-un bit the handle of the lamp with his mouth and, without hesitation, jumped up towards the holes visible on the tunnel's ceiling and inserted 3 fingers. Grab. An ordinary person would find it difficult to support their body with just 2 fingers, but it wasn't a challenging task for Mok Jong-un. Swish. Grab. Mok Jong-un reached out his left hand to the hole in front and inserted his index and middle fingers. In this way, Mok Jong-un moved about 2 steps along the ceiling. I was right. As expected, his guess was correct. If he inserted his fingers into the holes on the ceiling and moved without touching the ground, the tunnel's traps wouldn't be triggered. Realizing this, Mok Jong-un advanced without a moment's hesitation, inserting his fingers into the holes on the ceiling in front of the passage. Grab, grab, grab. After moving about 20 steps like that, the tunnel passage ended, and a space of about 7 pyong, approximately 23 square meters, came into view. Mok Jong-un's eyes flickered with interest as he entered. What is this? Inside, there were several sacks, and the surroundings were filled with numerous traces. Footprints in the deeply worn-out parts of the floor. There were numerous footprints, and there were also many traces of impacts on the walls. Mok Jong-un walked over and looked inside the sacks. There were small pellets inside, and after sniffing them, Mok Jong-un realized what they were. Pill for abstaining from grains, bijioctin. 2. Bijioctin. It was a pill made by mixing pine pollen and various grains, used by Taoist practitioners for closed-door cultivation in places like caves. It was meant to supplement the minimum amount of grain energy, but depending on the combination, it could also help expel toxins from the body. Mok Jong-un, who had extensive knowledge of medicinal herbs, had often eaten bijioctin made by his grandfather as a snack. Why are there sacks of bijioctin here? It seemed to be for the purpose of staying here for a long time. Had someone been practicing martial arts or something here alone? Mok Jong-un, who had been fiddling with the bijioctin inside the sack, soon turned his gaze elsewhere. On one side of the wall, there was something like a display case, and inside it were several wooden boxes. Is that it? Mok Jong-un approached it and opened one of the eye-catching wooden boxes. When he opened it, a book was inside. Ignited wood sword formation. See notes at the end of this chapter for explanation. Is this the secret manual? Mok Jong-un took out the book and flipped through it quickly. Inside, numerous sword techniques and movements were described in detail. Although he hadn't learned martial arts, he could at least tell that this was swordsmanship. Is this it? He wasn't sure if this was exactly the secret manual that the first madam was after. In the first place, he had no idea what the martial arts of the Yon Mok sword manner were, so there was nothing he could do about it. Mok Jong-un opened another wooden box. Click. When he opened the box, Ignited Wood Heart Transformation Technique. See notes for explanation. A book titled Ignited Wood Heart Transformation Technique was inside. Mok Jong-un took it out, flipped through it quickly, and nodded his head. It seemed to be a pair with the ignited wood sword formation in front, and it contained detailed descriptions of breathing techniques and Kai circulation methods for gathering and controlling internal energy. I should take this too. Mok Jong-un opened the other boxes in order. The other boxes didn't contain any books related to martial arts, but there were a few unexpectedly interesting items. However, the leader's seal was still nowhere to be seen. This is the only box left. There was nothing else around. So Mok Jong-un took out the box that was near the floor. But unlike the other wooden boxes, this box had an old paper with patterns drawn on it attached to the opening part. Judging from the paper torn in half, it seemed to have been attached as a sign not to open the box. Mok Jong-un opened it without much thought. He naturally thought that the leader's seal would be inside, but... Mok Jong-un tilted his head. Inside, there was no manor master's seal that should have been there, but an old book surrounded by a red rosary, emitting an extremely pungent smell. But what was surprising was that the cover of the book, is this? Human skin. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed to be made of human skin. If an ordinary person had realized that this was made of human skin, they might have been frightened, but Mok Jong-un showed a quite intrigued expression. What could this be? He was about to reach out his hand at that very moment. Swoosh. At that instant, something appeared like smoke, penetrating through the ceiling. It was none other than the demonic monk. Mok Jong-un had made him keep watch above, just like with guard Go-chan, so his appearance meant that someone was approaching the infirmary. As expected, the demonic monk was trying to say something, but when the demonic monk saw the item inside the wooden box in Mok Jong-un's hand, he trembled all over. Thud. He prostrated himself on the floor and began to perform something like a bow with a face full of reverence, raising both hands upward. Chapter 17. Tainted with Evil 1. The demonic monk, a wandering spirit and a monster, bowed with fear and reverence. As he showed this unexpected reaction, Mok Jong-un looked at the book inside the wooden box with curious eyes. A bizarre book made of human skin. Why was the demonic monk reacting like this upon seeing this book surrounded by a rosary? Unconsciously, Mok Jong-un reached out his hand towards the book inside the wooden box, and the moment his fingertips touched it, thump! Mok Jong-un's eyes narrowed. A heartbeat in an instant. In a fleeting moment, he felt a heartbeat. It was as clear as a beating heart. However, this heartbeat paradoxically did not occur because it was alive. Rather, it was closer to death. Thump! Thump! The heartbeat seemed to be getting stronger. Mok Jong-un, who had been staring intently at the book, closed the lid of the wooden box. A strong attraction arose. He wanted to remove the rosary and see what was inside, but it seemed difficult to do so at the moment. The reason the demonic monk appeared was because someone had intruded into the infirmary. An intruder! Mok Jong-un licked his upper lip as if he was disappointed. Then he turned his gaze upwards. Tap! Tap! A black-masked figure was moving through the tiles of the building. The masked figure spotted guard Go-chan guarding the only passage leading to the infirmary and further suppressed his presence. The masked figure's eyes flickered with interest. That was to be expected, as Mok Jong-un had 2 escorts. One of them could be considered no longer Mok Jong-un's man, so in reality, it was no exaggeration to say that he only had 1 escort left. But why isn't he guarding his side? Normally, an escort would guard right by their master's side. But he was guarding the passage away from the infirmary. It's one of two things. The first possibility was that the master he was guarding was sensitive, so he couldn't stay by his side. But this didn't seem to be the case. It didn't make sense to guard a master whose thigh had been pierced from a distance. Then it was the second possibility, the latter one. That was, is he keeping watch? On the master's order, he was monitoring the surroundings to see if someone else was coming. There was no way he would be away from his master if that wasn't the case. The masked figure stroked his chin. Keeping watch in the early morning hours of the rat without sleeping, this was getting more interesting than expected. His name was Zhou Ilsang. He was one of the 3 escorts of the second young master, Mok Yunpyong. Just in case, I need to check, whether it's a desperate strategy or not. The order he received from Mok Yunpyong was 1, to find out whether Mok Jong-un had truly lost his martial arts or not. If he hadn't lost them, it would mean that Guard Gam had falsely asked to be accepted, and if he really couldn't use martial arts, then the request to be accepted would be the truth. Shall I just check? Then it wouldn't be fun. If he really lost his martial arts, give him a proper scare. Tell him not to act recklessly. Heh, understood. That's how he came here as one of the 3 escorts. Zhou Ilsang's martial arts could be considered between a second-rate warrior and a first-rate expert. He stepped forward because he was a notch above Go Chan. Swish, tap. Zhou Ilsang moved in a different direction to avoid Go Chan's gaze and leaped over the wall. After crossing the wall, Zhou Ilsang climbed onto the roof of the infirmary and crawled through the gap between the tiles. What could he be doing that he set up a watch despite being injured? Was it because his injury was fake? Or was the information that he had lost his martial arts false? Regardless, there had to be a reason for doing so. Let's see what he's hiding. Thus, Zhou Ilsang infiltrated the infirmary by entering through the gap between the tiles. Suppressing even his breath, he quietly hung from the ceiling and observed below, and one of his eyebrows raised upwards. What is this? He saw a scene that was different from what he had expected. In Zhou Ilsang's eyes, where disappointment was evident, Mok Jong-un was seen reading a book with only his upper body raised on the bed, with a single lamp lit. He's just reading a book. Zhou Ilsang suspiciously surveyed the surroundings. However, there was no one inside the infirmary except for Mok Jong-un. Strange. He hadn't entered through the door, and Go Chan, his only escort, was keeping watch outside, so there was no way he could have noticed. He thought someone might have informed him, but that didn't seem to be the case either. Then, could there be a secret in that book? That possibility couldn't be ruled out either. Anyway, he had to make contact to confirm whether he had martial arts or not. Zhou Ilsang carefully suppressed his presence and moved along the ceiling towards the bed where Mok Jong-un was. And then, thud. He jumped down. At the same time, Zhou Ilsang snatched the book that Mok Jong-un was reading with lightning speed. Snatch. Zhou Ilsang, who had snatched the book, naturally expected Mok Jong-un to be startled or counterattack. However, contrary to his expectations, Mok Jong-un neither counterattacked nor showed any signs of surprise. Rather, he was looking at him nonchalantly. Who? Swish. As Mok Jong-un tried to say something, Zhou Ilsang aimed a dagger at his throat and whispered, "If you don't want to die, be quiet." Mok Jong-un closed his mouth. Things seemed to be going well, but Zhou Ilsang's mood wasn't like that. This fellow, suddenly, someone wearing a mask appeared, snatched the book, aimed a dagger at his throat, and was threatening him. Normally, anyone would be perplexed. No, they should show signs of fear or tension. However, Mok Jong-un was looking at him with an expressionless face, without any emotional change, as if it was an everyday occurrence. Judging from his reaction, he seemed like someone who knew in advance that he would come. But that couldn't be. Then, to show such a calm appearance, he must possess extraordinary martial prowess to at least protect his own life. Zhou Ilsang's eyes narrowed. Come to think of it, regardless of whether he had martial arts or not, when a person was startled, their body would move in some way as a conditioned reflex. But Mok Jong-un didn't move at all. Could it be that the information about him losing his martial arts is false? Glance. Zhou Ilsang turned his eyes and looked at the book he had snatched. However, upon seeing the title of the book, Zhou Ilsang's eyes trembled as if he had gone mad. It was none other than Ignited Wood Sword Formation among the people of the Yon Mok Sword Manor. There was no one who didn't know the name of this sword technique. This sword technique symbolized the Yon Mok Sword Manor. The reason was that this sword technique was a martial art that contained profound principles that only the leader of the Yon Mok Sword Manor could master. Ha! Zhou Ilsang's next action was something that even he himself hadn't planned. Zhou Ilsang grabbed Mok Jong'un's shoulder with the technique of Jumnasu and pressed down, pulling him. At the same time, he struck the acupoint on the back of his head with the hand holding the dagger. Smack! Mok Jong'un, who was struck, lowered his head. Zhou Ilsang exhaled roughly, his heart pounding and his breathing ragged. Ha! In a moment of surprise at the secret manual of Ignited Wood Sword Formation, he had struck the acupoint on the fellow's back of the head and made him faint. Was this the reason he set up a watch? Zhou Ilsang brought his hand to the acupoint of the unconscious Mok Jong'un. He had forgotten for a moment, but he also had to check whether Mok Jong'un had lost his martial arts or not. Swish! Zhou Ilsang placed his hand on the acupoint and sent his true energy into Mok Jong'un's body. Ah, there was no need for a long confirmation. If there was even a little bit of internal energy as soon as someone else's true energy entered, a reactive force would occur, or there would be some kind of rejection reaction. However, Mok Jong'un had none of that. Press. Zhou Ilsang pressed Mok Jong'un's abdomen near the danjian. It's not there. He really had no danjian. The corners of Zhou Ilsang's mouth rose. After examining Mok Jong'un's martial arts, the second young master Mok Yunpyong's request to scare him had already disappeared from his mind. Zhou Ilsang opened the pages of the secret manual Ignited Wood Sword Formation and flipped through them. He! Zhou Ilsang's lips twitched as he flipped through a few pages. He almost laughed without realizing it. He had wondered if it might be fake, but this was undoubtedly the genuine sword techniques of Ignited Wood Sword Formation. From the very beginning, the sword techniques were extraordinary. Calm down. He never dreamed that this would be in Mok Jong'un's hands. The leader was already in critical condition, likely to pass away any day now. And the retainers were also very concerned about the situation, as the leader's seal and the secret manual of Ignited Wood Sword Formation, the leader's exclusive martial art, were missing, which were important for the succession. But now, Ignited Wood Sword Formation had fallen into his hands. This is enough. Obtaining Ignited Wood Sword Formation was truly a stroke of luck. If his lord, Mok Yunpyong, were to learn Ignited Wood Sword Formation, the leader's exclusive martial art, even if the current leader were to die like this, the next leader would be in his lord's hands. An advantageous position. No matter how much the leader doted on the youngest, Mok Yuchen, during his lifetime, or even if the eldest, Mok Yongho, was there, as long as they were a martial arts family, the retainers would eventually have to support his lord. While he was rejoicing at that very moment, flinch. Suddenly, a strong chill ran through his entire body, making his skin crawl. At the same time, something pressed down on his shoulder. What is this? Startled, Zhou Ilsang hurriedly tried to draw up his internal energy. Right at that moment, smack. Ugh. Someone struck his danjian area with a fist. It was none other than Mok Jong'un, whom he believed he had knocked out. What? What kind of strength? Is this the strength of a fellow who has no internal energy? It was at least above second rate. Tremble. Caught off guard, and before he could draw up his internal energy, Zhou Ilsang's body became stiff for a very brief moment after being struck in the danjian. But that brief moment worked very unfavorably for him. Ack! Thud, thud, the blood vessels bulged. The bizarre sensation penetrating through his pressed shoulder. This sensation made him suffer and feel pain so much that it made him shudder. Zhou Ilsang gritted his teeth and tried to push away this strange sensation with his true energy. However, smack. Not missing that moment, Mok Jong'un swung his fist, striking his jaw while simultaneously throwing punches at his abdomen. Bam, 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 smack. Normally, These methods wouldn't have worked on Zhou Ilsang, who was approaching the level of a first-rate expert. But a moment of carelessness from obtaining the secret manual. And in a situation where a sensation that caused chills throughout his body was pressing down on his shoulder, he couldn't endure the punches that relentlessly targeted only the area near his danjian, no matter who he was. Arg. You bastard. You're sturdy. Then... Whack! Mok Jong-un grabbed the back of his head with both hands, pulled him in, and struck his face with his knee. Crack! Ugh! The sound of his nose and teeth breaking could be heard. Nevertheless, Mok Jong-un continued to punch the face of Zhou Ilsang, who was staggering backwards. Smack, smack. Even to the point where blood soaked his fists, Mok Jong-un didn't stop. Zhou Ilsang quickly lost consciousness like that. How long has it been? Zhou Ilsang, who had regained consciousness, opened his eyes with difficulty. Upon opening his eyes, he felt like his head was going to explode. What on earth? Having just woken up, he couldn't properly remember what had happened, but soon it came back to him. Mok Jong-un, who had been striking his face like a madman with an expressionless face. Damn it, he had let his guard down completely. No, should it be called carelessness. The first strike was indeed due to his carelessness after confirming that the fellow had no danjian, but what followed wasn't. What was that sensation? He couldn't forget that spine-chilling sensation. Because of that sensation, his body had become stiff, and he tried to endure it with his internal energy. But Mok Jong-un kept striking his danjian and vital points, causing him to lose consciousness. In fact, it wouldn't have been strange if he had died. What on earth was that? Zhou Ilsang was puzzled. He had definitely confirmed that Mok Jong-un had no internal energy, but if he had that level of striking power, it was no exaggeration to say that he possessed strength almost equal to his own. Damn it. Ha ha! But for now, that wasn't what was important. Zhou Ilsang struggled to open his eyes, which were stuck together with dried blood, and surveyed his surroundings. Zhou Ilsang frowned as he looked around. This wasn't the infirmary. Come to think of it, he had been feeling a strangely cool and damp sensation for a while, and it seemed to be some kind of cave. Drip, drip. Zhou Ilsang noticed drops of sweat or blood flowing from his body and rising into the air. He wondered what kind of phenomenon this was, but it was. Could it be? Am I hanging upside down right now? Now he seemed to understand why his face felt like it was going to burst. He thought it was because his face hurt from being beaten so much, but it was a phenomenon caused by the blood rushing to his head as he was hanging upside down. Ha ha! Zhou Ilsang's breathing became rough. He didn't know where this place was, but something felt unsettling. It seemed like he needed to escape quickly. Phew! Zhou Ilsang focused on his breathing and tried to draw out the energy from his danjian. However, what is this? But strength didn't enter his entire body. He wanted to concentrate, but it didn't feel like the sensation in all parts of his body except for his face had disappeared. Why is this happening? A cry escaped his bewildered mouth. Swish! While he was doing that, he heard someone's presence. Looks like you're awake. When he looked at the place where the sound came from, he saw Mok Jong-un walking on the ceiling upside down. Of course, it only appeared that way because of his inverted vision. Surprised by the paralyzed sensation throughout his body, Zhou Ilsang shouted, what the hell did you do? In response to his question, the corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth rose as if they would tear to his ears. Who knows? What could I have done? Shudder. Unlike his smile, the ominous malice itself was evident in his eyes. Zhou Ilsang felt a chill for the first time in his life. Chapter 18. Tainted with evil too. What the hell did you do to my body? In response to his question, Mok Jong-un smiled brightly and said, Who knows? What could I have done? Shudder. His mouth was clearly smiling, but his eyes, like those of a dead person, didn't move at all. Seeing this, Zhou Ilsang felt a chill for the first time in his life. Is this fellow really that Mok Jong-un? The Mok Jong-un he knew was, without exaggeration, the most pathetic among the brothers of the Mok family. But he never expected to see him like this. The atmosphere was completely different. It felt like he was facing a being that was on a different level, not an ordinary human. At that moment, Mok Jong-un approached him and spoke. You seem to be trembling a lot. Well, don't worry. If it were the usual method, I would have started by cutting somewhere, but now I've used dispersion powder. Dispersion powder? In response to Zhou Ilsang's question, Mok Jong-un pointed upwards with his finger and said, "This is a really good place." What? Previously, when I needed medicinal herbs, I had to search the mountains thoroughly to find them, but with so many medicinal herbs here, I can combine them as much as I need. Combining medicinal herbs. What did you do to me? It's nothing much. If you grind and mix the toxic rosebay one, soul-numbing powder, and the roots of trillium, you can paralyze everything except the head. Mok Jong-un spoke nonchalantly. Seeing Mok Jong-un like this, Zhou Ilsang swallowed his saliva with trembling eyes. What the hell was this fellow? Since when did he have such knowledge of medicinal herbs? Mok Jong-un, who was puzzled, slightly bent his knees, met his gaze, grabbed his hair, and said, "Grab." Actually, these things aren't that important. What's important is why the second young master, Mok Yunpyong, sent you. At Mok Jong-un's words, Zhou Ilsang closed his mouth. If he was going to tell him that, he wouldn't have worn a mask from the beginning. Seeing this, Mok Jong-un chuckled. You've become tight-lipped. Of course, since you came wearing a mask, you have no intention of talking nicely, right? What should I do? Just a moment ago. This person is Zhou Ilsang, an escort of the second young master, Mok Yunpyong. But young master, what will you do with him? Go Chan was dumbfounded. Zhou Ilsang was a skilled martial artist approaching the level of a first-rate expert. Did Mok Jong-un, who couldn't even move properly due to his pierced thigh, subdue such a person? Just how much was this fellow hiding? It was beyond comprehension. He's a man of the second young master. That's right. Why did he send him? I don't know either. Judging from the fact that he even wore a mask, it doesn't seem to be for a good reason. I guess there's no clue. Even if he's the second young master, it's unlikely that he would have made a reckless assassination attempt while the leader is still alive. But I really don't know why he sent him. Then I'll have to find out directly. What? You don't mean you're going to torture him or something, right? That would be a good method, too. Why, young master, it's better to let him go. Let him go. Go Chan warned the puzzled Mok Jong-un. The second young master has retainers who follow him and has built his own power base. If we carelessly provoke him by mistreating his man, there could be consequences, you mean? Yes, I apologize for angering you, but if we provoke him carelessly, it could become dangerous. Hum. Go Chan looked at Mok Jong-un with an uneasy expression. Judging by his thought process, he was terrifyingly cunning, but it was unpredictable where he would go off to. But one thing he could say with certainty. No matter what the second young master's motive was for sending a masked night visitor, there was nothing Mok Jong-un could do in his current situation, other than enduring it. Well, I'll think about it. You really shouldn't touch him. Yes, I understand what you're saying, Guard Go Chan. Right. No matter how unpredictable he was, as long as he was aware of the current situation, he thought Mok Jong-un wouldn't do anything reckless to make enemies. Unlike the first madam, who was cautious in everything despite being arrogant, the second young master was cunning but still young and emotional. Zhou Ilsang, who had been tense, seemed to have calmed down a bit as he caught his breath and spoke. What do you intend to do, and what can you do? What do you mean by that? Since you know who I am, it would be better to let me go. It would be better to let you go. That's right. Even if you've already done it, if you further harm me, do you think the second young master will stay still? Zhou Ilsang deliberately mentioned his backing. He didn't know what Mok Jong-un's intentions were for capturing him like this, but this was the end. What difference would it make even if he knew his identity? Wearing a mask was simply to handle the matter quietly. The second young master, Mok Yunpyong, had a strong sense of pride, so he would never forgive anyone who touched his men. Zhou Ilsang said to Mok Jong-un, whose one eyebrow had raised, "Since it has come to this, let's make a deal." A deal? Yes. If you let me go and give me the secret manual of ignited wood sword formation, I will speak to the young master and ask him to leave you alone, the third young master. Leave me alone means? It means you will be able to live safely even if the young master becomes the leader. And the price is the secret manual of ignited wood sword formation, right? That's right. Although he was inwardly tense due to the unfavorable situation, Zhou Ilsang took a strong stance. He thought that in such a situation, it was necessary to establish a clear hierarchy. If he showed weakness, he thought Mok Jong-un would come on strong instead. In the end, he'll have no choice but to yield. Ignited wood sword formation was a pearl in the pig's throat for Mok Jong-un. His maternal family was ruined, and none of the retainers supported him. If it was an item that was too much for him anyway, it wouldn't be a bad condition at all to hand it over like this and use it to preserve his life grip. At that moment, Mok Jong-un grabbed Zhou Ilsang's hair that he was holding. "Huh, you! Interesting. In a situation where your body may not remain intact, you trust your backing and make a reverse proposal. You bastard! I've heard enough, and from now on, I'll start with your fingers one by one." With those words, Mok Jong-un took out a peculiarly shaped blade. This is a blade called hassak, used for trimming medicinal herbs. It's for cutting hard things so it can easily cut fingers or toes. What? You can trust me because it's been verified. He had used it quite a lot. Startled by this, Zhou Ilsang hurriedly said to Mok Jong-un, "Why you? Did you not understand what I said? I came under the orders of the second young master. If you harm me, he will." "Yes, you talk too much, so I'll cut one and start." Saying that, Mok Jong-un grabbed one of Zhou Ilsang's paralyzed and limp wrists. Then he inserted his right index finger into the hole of the hassak. Seeing this, Zhou Ilsang's face turned deathly pale. Stop! Are you really insane? Like this?" Crunch. At that moment, the sound of something hard being cut off was heard. Zhou Ilsang moved his head with a stiff expression and looked at something that had fallen on the floor. It was the two joints of his index finger. Zhou Ilsang was speechless. In the first place, he had no sensation anywhere except his head, so it didn't hurt. But seeing his severed finger, he was dumbfounded and at a loss for words. To him, Mok Jong-un said with a smile, "It doesn't hurt, so it doesn't feel real, right? That's why when using hassak, I usually don't paralyze the body with dispersion powder and just tie them up. That way they can feel some pain, but since you've learned martial arts, I had no choice." That's why Mok Jong-un had to use dispersion powder. So to give at least a visual effect, he brought it right in front of him and cut off his finger. "I've rambled on for too long. From now on, I'll just cut one by one until you talk. Grab." With those words, Mok Jong-un grabbed Zhou Ilsang's second finger. It was the middle finger of his right hand. Zhou Ilsang, whose middle finger was grabbed, was momentarily dazed, then said in a panic, "Stop!" Crunch. Despite his plea to stop, Mok Jong-un cut off Zhou Ilsang's middle finger with the hassak. The severed middle finger could be seen twitching on the floor. Zhou Ilsang, who had to stare at it, felt like his mind was going to turn upside down. Then he heard Mok Jong-un's voice. "Shall we do the thumb this time?" As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jong-un grabbed the thumb and inserted it directly into the hole of the hassak. Seeing this, Zhou Ilsang couldn't hide his perplexity. He was right-handed. If his thumb was cut off here, he wouldn't be able to do anything with his right hand anymore. "Esto!" He couldn't finish his words. No matter what he said, this madman would cut it off no matter what. "Squeeze!" At that moment, Mok Jong-un's hand holding the hassak was about to exert force. At that instant, a voice burst out of Zhou Ilsang's mouth. "Young Master Yunpyong sent me to confirm whether you really lost your martial arts or not." At those words, the force in Mok Jong-un's hand holding the hassak loosened. It had slightly dug into the flesh of his thumb, but fortunately it wasn't cut off. Thump, 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 thump. Although his body was paralyzed, Zhou Ilsang felt his heartbeat strongly. It was strange. He had been tortured in the past as well. But Mok Jong-un's method had pushed him to the brink of death too quickly. "Ha ha! He sent you to confirm whether I lost my martial arts or not." That's right. Zhou Ilsang, whose fear had grown, didn't realize it, but his manner of speaking had become quite polite. Regardless, Mok Jong-un didn't hide his puzzlement. That was because he hadn't been exposed as a fake, so he became suspicious when he heard that Zhou Ilsang had received such an order. At this point, Mok Jong-un's thoughts quickly approached the truth. If he received such an order without being exposed as a fake, it means he obtained that information from someone. But there are only two people who know that I'm a fake. Guard Go-chan and Guard Gam. Among them, Guard Go-chan had been with him continuously. The corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth rose. He switched sides quickly. Mok Jong-un was convinced that the source of this information was Guard Gam. His betrayal was predetermined from the beginning, but he didn't expect him to switch sides so quickly. Thanks to that, things had become troublesome. But at least he used his brain. In case he had to take responsibility, he must have informed them in a way that suggested Mok Jong-un had lost his martial arts while switching sides, so as not to expose the fact that he was a fake. Mok Jong-un chuckled and said to Jo Il-sang, "By any chance was the person who told you this Guard Gam?" Jo Il-sang's eyes slightly widened. Until now, Mok Jong-un shouldn't have known that Guard Gam had pledged loyalty to his lord, so how did he guess it in one go? Did he suspect it from the beginning? Jo Il-sang, who was puzzled, soon answered. That's right. As expected. It didn't deviate from his expectations. Mok Jong-un, who had been nodding his head, stared intently at Jo Il-sang. Now, what should I do? At Mok Jong-un's words, Jo Il-sang spoke in a pleading voice. Please spare me. I will definitely keep today's events a secret. I won't tell young Master Yunpyong so. What should I do about this? Pardon? I think I've inflicted too many wounds for that. Although Jo Il-sang himself wasn't aware of it, his face was almost completely battered. His nose bone was broken and depressed, and his cheekbones and forehead were grotesquely protruding, as if the bones had been fractured. Moreover, 2 of his fingers had been cut off. One way or another, Mok Yunpyong would find out and become greatly enraged. Why, young master? Even if I disappear, young Master Yunpyong will surely seek revenge. Well, probably, but you don't need to worry about that. Why? Everyone seems to dread the secret manual of ignited wood sword formation, so if need be, I can use it to negotiate. Isn't that okay? At Mok Jong-un's words, Jo Il-sang's mind went blank. It was because, as Mok Jong-un said, if he negotiated using ignited wood sword formation, the leader's exclusive sword technique, even Mok Yunpyong, who cherished his subordinates, would likely let it pass. Jo Il-sang, who was dazed and perplexed, hurriedly said, Young master, I had no idea you were so brilliant and outstanding, so, like Guard Gam, I also want to pledge my loyalty to you. To me? Why, yes, please give me a chance. I will dedicate my life to you. All sorts of words came out. It was to save his life. You'll even dedicate your life. That's right. So please? Is that so? Seeing Jo Il-sang like this, Mok Jong-un slightly tilted his head and went somewhere. Young master, feeling uneasy, Jo Il-sang called out to Mok Jong-un. It didn't take long. After a while, Mok Jong-un appeared with a wooden box in his hand, which had traces of something peculiar attached to it. Mok Jong-un placed the wooden box under Jo Il-sang's head, who was hanging upside down. What's this? When he expressed his puzzlement, Mok Jong-un soon opened the lid of the wooden box. Upon opening the lid, something that looked like an old book tied with an old rosary was revealed. Why is he showing this to me? While Jo Il-sang was completely clueless, his eyes soon trembled. Could it be? It was because he realized that the material of the book was not paper. To the perplexed Jo Il-sang, Mok Jong-un said, Before you woke up, I tried to read this book, but strangely, the part tied with the rosary was fixed, and no matter what I did, it couldn't be removed. How will you? I saw in the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang that there is something overflowing with spiritual energy that seals evil things. This rosary seems to be one of them. Young master, please. Mok Jong-un ignored his words and continued his own. But it says that if there's another evil thing added to that sealing item, its power weakens. What are you trying to do? Like this. Slice. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jong-un swiftly cut Jo Il-sang's throat with something sharp. The last scream was the final sound Jo Il-sang made. As if his vocal cords had been cut, only gurgling sounds came from Jo Il-sang's mouth. Mok Jong-un said with a bright smile, You said you could even dedicate your life, right? You son of a bitch, who said they would dedicate their life in this way? Jo Il-sang glared at Mok Jong-un with eyes full of resentment. It was too much of a shame to lose his life like this. Whoosh! The red blood flowing from Joe Ilsang's sliced throat. That blood poured onto the book made of human skin tied with a rosary inside the wooden box. And it soaked the rosary and the book, the blood of a dying man. Blood filled with resentment. As it soaked the book, a bizarre phenomenon occurred. Thump, thump. The heartbeat sound that could be heard without even directly touching the book grew louder. As if it were a heart, something like blood vessels bulged on the outer surface of the book. Oh-ho, thump, 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 thump. Soon, the heartbeat sound grew even louder and faster. Crack, 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 crack. The rosaries that were tying the book began to crack. Then crunch, 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 crunch. The rosaries that were trembling as if in agony were suddenly compressed, as if something had grabbed them, and they shattered. The shattered pieces were sucked into the blood pooled inside the wooden box. Along with that, a bizarre incident occurred in the cavity. Gush, gush, gush. Blood began to fall like a waterfall from the entire wall of the cavity, flowing along the ceiling. It was a sight that made one doubt their own eyes. The corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth reached his ears as he watched this. The 5th-level blue spirit, extremely dangerous. At least 10 or more diviners are required for exorcism. An old wandering spirit that has existed for over 100 years. It can exert an enormous influence within a set radius and even cause auditory and visual hallucinations, inflicting pain. Oleanderite arrow curving left chapter 19, tainted with evil 3. The 5th-level blue spirit, extremely dangerous. At least 10 or more diviners are required for exorcism. An old wandering spirit that has existed for over 100 years. It can exert an enormous influence within a set radius and even cause auditory and visual hallucinations, inflicting pain. This is written in the synopsis of various philosophers, basic writings of the school of yin and yang. And in the latter part of this, it is described. A wandering spirit that has existed for over 100 years loses its human qualities from that point onward and enters the realm of true monsters. A true monster refers to the eerie and sinister supernatural beings, Imi Mangnyang, one itself. Ha ceiling. It literally serves the role of trapping something, the old rosary. The moment it was compressed and shattered, a bizarre spectacle unfolded. Gush, gush, gush. Blood poured down like a waterfall from the entire wall of the cavity, flowing along the ceiling and filling the surroundings with blood. The flowing blood quickly filled the floor, making it muddy. At this, the corners of Mok Jong-un's mouth reached his ears. His anticipation heightened. Monster? This was undoubtedly a monster. Moreover, it was an existence incomparable to the demonic monk. He had hoped for something around the level of a green spirit, but an existence beyond that unexpectedly appeared. It was a moment when a diviner would have been perplexed. Thump. Thump, heartbeat. In the cavity that was gradually filling with blood, the sound of a beating heart could be heard. Then a bizarre incident occurred. In the center of the cavity where blood was flowing from all directions, a heartbeat sound emanated, and soon a heart was formed around it. Whoosh! Blood gathered around the heart. The blood formed into one organ, then 2, then 3, and bones quickly enveloped the organs, followed by muscles attaching to the bones. Clack, clack. Soon, pale skin emerged on the surface of the muscles. The entire process was awe-inspiring, as if witnessing the birth of something. Gush. The blood gushed upwards, becoming a reverse waterfall and enveloping the being whose skin was forming. And the moment the blood waterfall was sucked into the ceiling, creak, the being revealed itself. It was a beautiful being with a pale face and disheveled long hair hanging down, despite wearing a crown. The being, wearing a red inner garment and a black outer garment, was holding a long pipe. Its appearance was even more natural than the demonic monk. Phew. The being, with its red lips, took a deep puff from the pipe and exhaled smoke. Judging solely by its appearance, it looked to be in its late teens at most, but due to its attire, it was difficult to discern whether it was male or female. Of course, Mok Jong-un didn't care about such things. Quite a grandiose entrance. May I ask who? Before he could even finish his words, Mok Jeong-un was forcibly drawn towards the being by a strong pull before he could complete his sentence. Gush! The surging blood had already risen up to his thighs. The being, holding the pipe and exhaling smoke, brought its face close to Mok Jeong-un, and it looked at Mok Jeong-un from top to bottom. "What are you doing?" The being, after staring for a while, slightly raised the corners of its mouth. Then it erased the previous smile and put on a serious expression, waving its hand. At that moment, whoosh, bam, Mok Jeong-un's body floated up and heavily collided with the ceiling of the cavity. Then it fell into the cavity filled with blood. Splash. Mok Jeong-un, his entire body soaked in blood, staggered to his feet. Puha! Mok Jeong-un swept his blood-soaked hair upwards. The being, watching this sight, opened its mouth. "Foolish mortal, empty your soul and render your soul to me." The voice was distinctly audible. Unlike the demonic monk, whose voice was muffled and incomprehensible, the sound resonated clearly. No, it felt more like it was echoing from various places. Mok Jeong-un scratched his head and said, "Like the demonic monk, wandering spirits always covet the bodies of others. Can't you do anything without someone else's body? Tusk tusk." The being clicked its tongue and scoffed. As the being lightly tapped the pipe in the blood gushed up in several strands, then elongated like whips, binding and restraining Mok Jeong-un's arms and legs. Arg. He exerted strength, but the restraining force was much stronger. Mok Jeong-un smacked his lips as if it was troublesome. Indeed, he could understand why the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang stated that it was extremely dangerous and required at least 10 diviners. What should I do? Although he had read the basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang, he wasn't well versed in sorcery yet. At that moment, the being made a gesture of drawing a vertical line Chinese letter with the pipe towards Mok Jeong-un. Then, slash. Along with a burning pain in his chest, his clothes turned red in a vertical line Chinese letter shape. It seemed like he had been cut, and the pain was considerable. Nevertheless, Mok Jeong-un's expression didn't change much. As if expecting a scream of pain to burst out, one of the being's eyebrows raised. "You're a child with strong endurance." "I'm used to it." "Used to it. Then can you endure this as well?" With those words, the being raised the pipe upwards. It happened in an instant. Gush. The blood that had risen up to the lower half of the body and the cavity surged upwards. Then, in an instant, it completely filled the entire cavity with blood. Inside the blood-filled cavity, Mok Jeong-un's body floated. Ugh! Mok Jeong-un held his breath. It was no different from being submerged in water. The being watched Mok Jeong-un, who was unable to move, with a gleeful and smirking expression. Its eerie eyes reminded one of the fact that this being was a ghost. Swoosh! The being approached Mok Jeong-un. Then it grabbed Mok Jeong-un's chin, who was unable to move, and said, "The emotion you're feeling now is fear." The being couldn't finish its sentence. What the being wanted to see was a face filled with fear, suffocating from the blood and unable to breathe. In a confined space, unable to move, and in a situation where one couldn't even breathe, anyone would be afraid. However, Mok Jeong-un's eyes were staring at the being without a hint of wavering. You're peculiar. For a living human to have such eyes." The being showed curiosity. At that moment, Mok Jeong-un, who had been holding his breath, flicked his tongue. The taste he felt on the tip of his tongue was definitely blood. The blood that filled this cavity was much redder than crushed, ripe cornus fruits. The sticky sensation was also the very essence of blood stickiness. All 5 senses told him that this was indeed blood. However, it's different. This is nothing but death. Mok Jeong-un snorted. How much blood had he seen from those who were called concurrent killing demons? When he touched that blood, he could feel something alive, but what he saw now felt nothing but death. It's not real. Therefore, even if it was perceived by the 5 senses, everything was false. Then, swoosh. All the blood that was reflected in Mok Jeong-un's eyes disappeared as if it had never existed in the first place. In sorcery, this is called enlightenment too. By denying the perceived recognition itself, one breaks free from all hallucinations that deceive one's own senses. The theory or words are easy. However, even highly trained diviners found it difficult to escape from this. It was because nothing was easier to deceive than human senses. The being's eyes flickered with interest. As time passed, it expected Mok Jong-un to struggle, unable to hold his breath and show an appearance no different from other living beings. However, he had freed himself from the hallucination on his own. "You're more interesting than you look." The corners of the being's red lips rose. Then it approached Mok Jong-un and tapped his shoulder with the pipe. At that moment, thud, Mok Jong-un was forced to kneel on one knee on the floor. It felt like a single tap, but judging by how his right knee had dug into the floor, one could imagine how much force was applied. The being took a deep puff from the pipe and exhaled smoke towards Mok Jong-un, saying, "Mortal, if you offer your soul to me of your own accord, I shall grant your wish." "Wish?" "Yes. For a boy not even in his prime to have such eyes, you must not have lived an ordinary life. Hand over your soul to me, then I shall dismember your enemies and make even their souls disappear. You're overflowing with confidence." At Mok Jong-un's words, the being let out a mad laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha, rumble rumble." The being merely laughed, but the entire cavity was shaking. It was a being on a completely different level from the demonic monk. The blue spirit level was the realm where one had gone beyond ordinary wandering spirits and entered the domain of Imi-Mang-Nyang. The being, who had been laughing for a while, said with a sneer, "The only reason you can utter impudent words to me and remain unscathed is because I want to take your soul. So be grateful for the mercy I bestow upon you." "Is this something to be grateful for?" "You have no fear at all." Tap. The being lifted Mok Jong-un's chin with the pipe. Then, as if appraising him, it said, "At least your face is to my liking. It wouldn't be bad since your soul is beautiful. You're quite eager to covet my body. Once I have decided, your soul is mine. And if I refuse?" At those words, the being showed a sneer. "Although your soul may be slightly damaged, I will take it by force." "Someone other than you tried to do that, but there's a failed monster right above, you know." At Mok Jong-un's words, the being chuckled. "You dare compare me to such a lowly ghost. If I put my mind to it, it wouldn't be too difficult to extinguish your soul and seize your soul. If you're so confident, why don't you try taking it? You're impudent. If that's what you desire, I shall take it by force." As soon as it finished speaking, the being removed the pipe from Mok Jong-un's chin and tried to raise it above his head. At that moment, Mok Jong-un, who had lowered his head, shrugged his shoulders. Seeing that, the being said with the corners of its mouth raised, "Have you suddenly become afraid?" "No, I just remembered something interesting." "Something interesting?" In response to the being's puzzled question, Mok Jong-un lifted something with both hands. The moment it saw that, the being's eyes wavered. It was because it recognized what Mok Jong-un was holding without even looking. It was the book made of human skin. The book, soaked in the blood of the dead Zhou Il-sang, seemed to have a glossy sheen unlike before. According to the basic writings of the school of yin and yang, the older the monster, the more it has a medium that it is connected to and dwells in. This book must be it, right? You're doing a foolish thing. It doesn't seem like a foolish thing, judging by your cautious behavior. You're really making me angry. As soon as the being finished speaking, Mok Jong-un's body floated in the air and crashed into the ceiling. Bam, bam, but it didn't end there. Mok Jong-un's body fell heavily to the floor. As the being flicked its hand, he rose again, and this time his head smashed into the ceiling. Bam! Blood flowed from his impacted head. The being, as if having no intention of stopping here, consecutively slammed Mok Jong-un against the cavity wall. Bam, 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 bam. Kahuk! Fresh blood burst out of Mok Jong-un's mouth as he collided with the wall. After a few more collisions, Mok Jong-un's half-limp body floated in the air. The being reached out its hand towards Mok Jong-un and said, "Put that down immediately." "Cough, cough, why don't you just take it?" "Why go through the trouble? Foolish mortal, I'm giving you a chance." "A chance?" "Yes, it's not that you can't touch it directly, is it?" The being didn't answer Mok Jong-un's meaningful question. From its reaction, Mok Jong-un could be certain. This old wandering spirit seemed unable to directly touch the book made of human skin. If that was the case, it could have just snatched the book from the beginning, but instead, It tried to make him let go of it by inflicting pain on him. You're really asking for death. Even if you have that, you can't do anything with it. What can someone who is neither a Taoist nor a diviner do? Fine, I'll give up on your soul. I'll just kill you like this. Just as the being was about to reach out its hand to do something, something completely unexpected happened. Crunch. At that moment, Mok Jong-un bit into the cover of the book. The blue spirit being couldn't hide its perplexity upon seeing this. Until now, it had encountered countless diviners, Taoists, and monks, but none of them had ever done such a thing as sealing or burning the book. It was because the evil energy of the book was so strong that it couldn't be damaged by ordinary means. This was the same for Mok Jong-un. While his body was being slammed against the cavity, he had tried to tear the book apart with brute force, but to no avail. Then, by chance, he discovered that only the outer cover of the book was made of human skin. In that case, Mok Jong-un's choice was very simple. Chomp chomp. Mok Jong-un tore off only the outer part of the book made of human skin and chewed on it in his mouth. Gasp. At that moment, the blue spirit being clutched its chest, distorting its pale and delicate brows. Chapter 20. Tainted with Evil 4. The human skin that formed the surface of the book. No one had ever thought of tearing it off and putting it in their mouth. In the first place, who would put something made of human skin and exuding an eerie aura in their mouth? It was truly a crazy act. Chomp chomp. Tough, Mok Jong-un, who had put the human skin in his mouth and was chewing it vigorously. Strangely, no matter how much he bit it, the human skin was too tough to damage his teeth or tear off. However, it seemed that this wasn't completely ineffective. Gasp. The blue spirit being clutched its chest, distorting its delicate brows. It seemed to feel some kind of pain. At this, Mok Jong-un chewed the human skin even more forcefully. Damn mortal. Whoosh. At that moment, the blue spirit's eyes turned red like blood. Along with that, as the blue spirit swung its long pipe, the blood of the dead Zhou Ilsang that had been flowing on the floor floated into the air and began to rotate. What is this? It was definitely not an illusion. The sight of the blood droplets floating in the air and rotating was truly overwhelming. Mok Jong-un's eyes trembled as he focused on the blood droplets. Due to the rapid rotation, it was difficult to perceive with the naked eye, but he was somehow following it. This fellow, even the blue spirit being realized that Mok Jong-un was accurately observing the blood droplets. It was surprising, considering that he was a human who hadn't even learned sorcery or martial arts. Even if his body and reflexes completely surpassed those of an ordinary human, it was no exaggeration. It's useless, mortal. The blue spirit being pointed its pipe towards Mok Jong-un. At that moment, the blood droplets that were rapidly rotating inside the cavity all rushed towards Mok Jong-un at once. Whoosh, 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 swoosh. Right at that instant, Mok Jong-un, who had been observing the droplets, slid on the floor the moment the blue spirit being swung its pipe, and he threw his body towards the being. Foolish. He was just about to reach the blue spirit being. A rain of blood poured down on the front of Mok Jong-un's upper body, penetrating his flesh. Stab, 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 stab. Mok Jong-un frowned. He felt no particular sensation from ordinary pain. However, the blood that had penetrated his flesh was tearing through his skin like sharp, hidden weapons. The blue spirit being seemed to enjoy Mok Jong-un's pain as it raised the corners of its mouth. Is it painful? Then spit it out. Grab. The blue spirit being made a gesture of clenching its fist towards Mok Jong-un. Then, the blood that had penetrated his skin dug deeper into his body, stimulating Mok Jong-un's nerves. Ugh! For the first time, a groan escaped his mouth. The blue spirit being clicked its tongue at the sight. Normally, with this level of pain, one should be writhing in agony and pleading for their life. But that was all there was to it. Are you used to pain? Or is your endurance foolishly strong? Ha, the blue spirit being sucked on the pipe. Then it exhaled a hazy smoke and stretched out the pipe as if to finish things off. Foolish mortal, just die. At that moment, Mok Jong-un, who had been in pain, muttered, "Demonic monk! What are you babbling about? Demonic monk!" Although his pronunciation was slurred due to the human skin in his mouth, what Mok Jong-un shouted was none other than swoosh, the demonic monk. The demonic monk appeared, penetrating through the ceiling. However, its condition seemed strangely poor. Although it was always hazy since it was a wandering spirit, there were black spots appearing all over its body. Seeing this, the blue spirit being chuckled and said, "It was you." At those words, the demonic monk knelt on one knee and bowed its head to pay respects to the blue spirit being. Why, seeing that, Mok Jong-un couldn't understand. Was it because it was a higher-level monster? However, that was a rule created from the perspective of diviners, as stated by the author of the synopsis of various philosophers and basic writings of the school of yin and yang. It wasn't entirely accurate. You seem to have spiritual talent, seeing how you're connected to a wandering spirit. But unfortunately, this damn fellow is nothing more than my subordinate. Subordinate, regardless of their level, was it a being they knew in their previous life? If that was the case, it was a setback. The demonic monk was Mok Jong-un's servant, but if he couldn't control it, it would be of no use at all. Then he would have to navigate through this situation on his own. Chomp! Mok Jong-un chewed on the human skin in his mouth again. Ugh, you! Then, the blue spirit being clutched its chest again and glared at him with a murderous gaze, swinging its pipe. Stab, 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 stab. As it swung the pipe, the blood droplets that had penetrated his body came out. It looked like it was showing mercy, but it wasn't. Whoosh. The blood droplets that had come out of his body merged and formed a sharp thorn. The blue spirit being made a gesture of striking the pipe downwards. Oh no, whoosh. The sharp thorn aimed at Mok Jong-un's heart. Mok Jong-un rolled his body to the side to avoid it. HMP. The blue spirit being scoffed and swung the pipe again as if he couldn't escape. Then, the blood thorn that had been stuck in the floor changed direction towards Mok Jong-un. Whoosh! The speed was too fast to dodge. However, thud, huh. It was about to pierce his heart accurately, but something appeared and pushed Mok Jong-un away. It was the demonic monk. You damn fool! The demonic monk waved its hands, not knowing what to do. Mok Jong-un was also puzzled by this situation. The demonic monk, who had been kneeling and bowing its head just a moment ago, suddenly helped him avoid the blue spirit being's attack. Why, while he was wondering, the blue spirit being clicked its tongue and said, "Ho, are you saying you'll fulfill your duty as a servant?" The demonic monk couldn't hide its troubled expression. Although Mok Jong-un didn't know the relationship between the two, he couldn't help but smirk inwardly at the sight of the demonic monk helping him, but still being cautious. For whatever reason, the demonic monk was helping him regardless of its will. This was quite important in the current situation. Demonic monk? Swoosh. At Mok Jong-un's shout, the demonic monk naturally blocked the blue spirit being's path. Indeed, the demonic monk couldn't refuse Mok Jong-un's orders. Then, even if the blue spirit being was of a higher level, it might be possible to make them fight. Thud. Just when he thought he didn't know, the blue spirit being, who had narrowed the distance in an instant, grabbed the demonic monk's neck. Then I'll kill both of you. The demonic monk, whose neck was grabbed, couldn't move an inch. Seeing how it couldn't move despite its larger stature, it seemed to be due to the difference in their levels. Not all wandering spirits were the same. Chomp chomp. Mok Jong-un vigorously chewed on the human skin in his mouth to allow the demonic monk to escape. Then, ugh. You must be desperate to die. The blue spirit being seemed enraged as it waved its pipe with a distorted face. Then, the scattered blood droplets floated into the air once again. Swish, swish, swish. The blood droplets transformed into sharp thorns and rapidly rotated around Mok Jong-un. This time, it seemed determined to finish him off. In that instant, Mok Jong-un's thoughts flowed in a direction that the blue spirit being didn't expect even more. Gulp! Mok Jong-un swallowed the human skin he had been chewing in his mouth. The blue spirit being's bloody eyes wavered upon seeing this. In the first place, there had never been anyone who put that in their mouth and chewed on it, but it was also the first time someone swallowed it. You crazy mortal! The blue spirit being swung its pipe towards Mok Jong-un. Then, the numerous blood droplets that had been rapidly rotating and surrounding him all rushed towards Mok Jong-un at once. Stab, 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 stab. Ugh! As the sharpened blood droplets penetrated, Mok Jong-un's body twisted. The blood droplets not only penetrated his body and stiffened his nerves, but also seemed to make his muscles move involuntarily. "I'll tear your body to pieces and extract." The blue spirit being couldn't finish its sentence. No, its hand holding the pipe trembled, and soon its face distorted in agony. What on earth? The blue spirit being glared at Mok Jong-un as if it couldn't understand. It had been painful even when he had vigorously chewed on the human skin, but this was incomparable. Its body, composed of a soul, ached as if cracks were forming throughout. "It's in pain." Mok Jong-un couldn't precisely know the reason either. However, one thing he could tell was that his stomach had become unusually hot after forcibly swallowing the human skin. Inside, the heat even made him feel as if his internal organs were burning. Mok Jong-un's mouth corner rose bitterly at the pain he felt from within, which he hadn't experienced in a long time since he first tasted poison. The pain felt from the inside was something he was already accustomed to. But right at that moment, the blue spirit being who had been suffering suddenly appeared in front of Mok Jong-un and grabbed his neck. "You mere lowly mortal." Drip, drip. Mok Jong-un's eyes flickered with interest. Tears of blood were flowing from the eyes of the blue spirit being who was enraged. Its appearance was not only spine-chilling, but its deep resentment made the term wandering spirit seem appropriate. "How dare someone like you?" The blue spirit being strangled his neck with both hands. As his breath was blocked, Mok Jong-un reflexively grabbed the blue spirit being's wrists to shake it off. Grab. Right at that moment, a bizarre scene appeared in Mok Jong-un's mind. A grand hall entirely stained with blood, and numerous people brutally killed. In the center of it all, someone drenched in blood, panting with a sword stuck in the floor. That someone was the blue spirit being. Ha ha, the blue spirit being was in a wretched state. It was a situation where it wouldn't be strange to die at any moment. The blue spirit being turned its head and looked at the throne in the grand hall. Someone was sitting on it arrogantly. The blue spirit being stared at that being, whose face was obscured by shadows, with eyes filled with hatred. The blue spirit being wailed at the being sitting on the throne, spitting out blood. However, strangely, its voice couldn't be heard. The blue spirit being, who had been furious enough to vomit blood, tightly grasped the hilt of the sword. Then it tore its clothes, wrapped them around its wrist to secure it, and tried to throw its body towards the one sitting on the throne. Thud. However, in the blink of an eye, the one on the throne had plunged its hand into the blue spirit being's chest. Then, that being pulled something out of the blue spirit being's chest. It was none other than the heart. It was a beating heart. How often does one get to see their own heart while alive? And beyond that, how would it feel to witness one's own heart being crushed by someone else? Crunch. Along with that, a scream that seemed to tear through the eardrums pierced sharply. Then the illusion he had just seen disappeared, and the blue spirit being was seen with its crown removed, hair hanging down limply, and a shocked expression on its face. Was it a woman? When wearing a crown and exuding a sharp and overwhelming aura, it was indistinguishable, but looking at its current appearance, it definitely appeared to be a woman. But why was the blue spirit being reacting like this? While he was puzzled, Mok Jong-un could see a red, thread-like thing coming out of his body connected to her. What is this? That wasn't all. The thread was also connected to the demonic monk. Could it be? He had a rough idea of what this was, but the blue spirit being grabbed its hair and screamed, "Ah, for me to be a servant."